couple of items on the agenda before we get on to the community sports inquiry. We'll get through that in a few minutes and we'll be on the round table fairly soon. Okay, good morning and welcome to the 23rd meeting of the Health and Sport Committee in 2012. Can I remind all of those present that mobile phones and Blackberries should be turned off as they can interfere with the sound system. Apologies have been received from Duncan McNeill, MSP, and understand Richard Lyle, MSP, is hoping to attend the meeting today, but he has been delayed. Can we move to agenda item 1? And the first item on our agenda is a declaration of interest by George Adam, as this is the first meeting he has attended as a committee member. Welcome, George. In accordance with Section 3 of the Code of Conduct, I invite George to declare any interest relevant to the remit of the committee. I remind you that any declaration should be brief but sufficiently detailed to make clear to any listener the nature of the interest.
Okay then, thank you very much, Convener. I refer everyone to my published register of interest, but I might add for completeness that I was a councillor in Renfrewshire Council in May, until May this year, and also a member of Renfrewshire Leisure Trust Board, a board member as well, just for completeness as well, up until May this year. But apart from that, and being a season ticket holder at St Mirren FC, I don't think there's anything else.
Okay, I think it's important you registered that last particular bit of declaration of interest. George, you're welcome to the committee and thank you for putting that on the record. Moving to agenda item 2, and the second item on our agenda is the decision of whether to take item 5 in private, and that is the consideration of the programme of evidence for the community sport inquiry. Members will recall that last week we decided to take last week's section in relation to this in public. So can I ask members if they've agreed to hold that in public at this particular meeting also? Okay, thank you for that. Agenda item 3. The third item on our agenda is to delegate to the convener responsibility for arranging for the SPCB to pay under Rule 12.4.3 any expenses of witnesses in the inquiry before us today. Can I get members' agreement to delegate that to the convener? Okay, thank you very much. So we now move on to agenda item 4, inquiry into support for community sport. Before we commence that, I'm sure committee members would want me to put on the record our congratulations to Andy Murray for his first major victory at the US Open last night. I know there's a few bleary eyes around the table. Myself, I'm certainly one of those. So just to put on a record, our congratulations to Andy, not just for making Scotland proud, but I think a personal achievement for both Andy and his family. Okay, so can I therefore welcome this morning as part of an inquiry into support for community sport Sarah-Pryde, Regional Swimming Development Manager, Scottish Swimming; David Drummond, Regional Manager, South East Region, Scottish Football Association; Andy Salmon, Scottish Golf Development Manager, Scottish Golf Union; Colin Thompson, Director of Rugby Operations, Scottish Rugby; Stuart Smith, Chief Executive, Scottish Canoe Association; and Steve Page, Head of Community Development, Cricket Scotland. So hopefully we'll have a good conversation around a lot of the issues here today, and Gil Patterson, MSP, is going to kick us off.
I think it's fairly clear already from our inquiry of last week that the backbone of sport in general is volunteering, and so I know my wife, for instance, she was involved, and I mentioned something about this last week too. At the weekend there was a gymnastics competition where we live. My daughter, 11, she participates, and I spoke to my wife and I was asking her about volunteering, and she said she didn't have time. She was up at 5:30 in the morning getting all the prizes ready to take, putting the labels on them, taking them there. She finished at 8:30 and didn't realise really that she was volunteering. So with that kind of background, and I know how it affects families, and since it is so important, the committee would like to know what the barriers are and how can we encourage people like my wife to, after my daughter maybe is too old or whatever reason she decides not to continue in gymnastics, how do we keep my wife involved in sport? So I'm happy to hear across the table people's views on that.
Does someone want to kick us off on that?
I'll be happy to make a comment on that.
Yep.
I think one of the barriers is I think in a previous session you looked at the distinction between, if you like, sporting volunteers, people who volunteer and coach, as opposed to volunteers who get involved in the governance side. I think on that governance side of clubs, the increasing level of legislation is a significant barrier to volunteer involvement. And I think what we try to do as a governing body, and what we need more support to be able to do better, is to help volunteers to be able to cut through that, if you like, that red tape, all those legislative requirements. We recognise that we can't ask government to stop legislating on things like health and safety, employment law, all those really important areas, but I think we can help volunteers a great deal in those areas.
Any other additions to that? Mr. Smith?
Yes. In a sport like canoeing, which is an outdoor sport, things like doing it safely and in a controlled way is very important. So we've always had an emphasis on coaching and coaching qualifications. So over half of our members are actually coaches. But I think, as Andy's just said, the new thing to look at going forwards is how to support the volunteers who are doing the other things in clubs, because perhaps in canoeing the emphasis has been on the coaching, whereas there's been a lot of changes in the last few years in terms of legislation, whether it's to do with child protection and other areas. And those are the areas that governing bodies like ourselves are trying to work on now to develop the volunteers in those areas and to support them better.
Mr. Page?
As well, it's defining what the term volunteering means. You said yourself that your wife just said, I'm just helping out. I think at times the label being a volunteer can have positive and negative connotations to it. And I think people at times, if they are volunteering, there's an expectation that they've got to give a lot of time towards it. But people don't always have that time. I think we've got to be careful how we define volunteer, and the people that are giving up their times realising they are actually volunteering as opposed to just helping out.
Well, going from what Steve said about volunteering, volunteers will be the bedrock of sport forever. We will never have sport without volunteers, and we have to state that. And the work that we have within rugby, within canoeing, within cricket, within golf, around about volunteers, produces a social capital in Scotland that we must never forget. And you know, volunteering, yes, sometimes it can be used in a derogatory term. People who get involved in sport do so because they are passionate about their sport. They're passionate about their children taking part in sport. They're passionate about their pupils, if they're school teachers, having the experience. And one of the barriers to me is that we do not recognise, or institutions do not recognise, whether that be the school, recognising the efforts that a teacher has made to volunteering, whether that be a club and senior club officials recognising, it's a typical Scottish trait that we talk everything down. We need to be celebrating volunteers. We need to be celebrating the impact that they have in communities. And not just from producing the Andy Murrays or the next Andy Murrays, but for producing children who can be competent, confident and participate within a community environment. Because, again, going back to the social capital of that, that goes beyond just winning the next gold medal. The amount of people more people get involved in sport, the more we have some social cohesion, whether that be in a school, whether that be in a community, whether it be an urban community, a rural community. And the people that are involved in sport, we really have to celebrate, we really have to push, and we have to support, whether that be time out of school, whether that be extra time or extra benefits within a community, simple recognition within a community. That's what we have to do, because without the volunteers, sport will die.
Now, before, a couple of members want to come in now, but yeah, Ms. Pryde. Yeah.
No, volunteering is so important for us in swimming. We devised a volunteer strategy a few years ago that looked at retention and recruitment, specifically around those areas of trying to get people in the sport, but then keeping them in the sport. I think that's one of the key issues. It's interesting that a few years ago we had 2,500 volunteers. We now have over 5,000. But when you speak to the clubs, they're saying volunteering is an issue. So our stats say that actually we have an increase in volunteers over the past few years, but around the clubs, they're saying we really need to get them in the door. So I think there's a lot to do with volunteering. We have a lot of work to do. Hopefully some of the clubs have some policies out there where one of the big clubs in Edinburgh, they say with their swimming members, if a child comes along to swim, that they encourage their parents also to be members and ask that they do at least one one volunteering aspect a year, whether it's a fundraising event or, you know, a bag packing or just maybe washing the kit if it's in football, just something like that to try and get them in. And we're trying to spread that word across other sports as well.
Pride, do you want to come in, Mr Drummond?
Yeah, just really just to say, very much similar to Andy as well, in terms of the barriers, really it's the legislation we need to be careful of, that there's not too much of it. I think we need to continue to provide opportunities as often as possible at times that suit volunteers. Certainly from a football point of view, we deliver in our region, which is the southeast of Scotland, somewhere in the region of 80 coach education courses in a year. But it is trying to recognise that the time that suits the volunteer, so it's not always Saturdays, Sundays, it's evenings, it's during the day, times that really work for them. In terms of trying to work with volunteers better, and I agree with what Sarah's saying, they really are the kind of lifeblood and what makes our game tick. I'm aware that in other countries that it is recognised within the kind of working environment far more than what it is probably in Scotland. If I take Sweden, for example, they provide opportunities for staff members to finish work early on a Monday at, say, 4 o'clock, because they know that they're going to be taking a training session at 4:30, but they'll work till 6 o'clock on a Tuesday. And there's that give and take with organisations in society. It's just a very, very different beast that we find ourselves with.
Now, Gil, you want to come back on that?
There's 2 points that come up specifically in that. The first one from Andy here on my left-hand side. Have you any kind of examples with regards to legislation that has probably been put in place for a good reason, but maybe it's overbearing? Have you any examples? You may not be able to produce them right at the minute, in fact, across the table here. If there's issues that we perhaps in a political sense that we could look and review, we would be very interested to hear that. I'm fully aware. You know, I also have a business. I don't run it, my son runs it now, thank goodness. But duty of care puts an awful lot of burden on the employer. I think it's a good thing in many regards. So, you know, there may be a different way to do it, but you know, still have the same protections that were first intended. But anyway, I'm talking too much.
No,
maybe
fine.
Your views on it.
I can think of 2 specific examples where legislation, which I think was well-meaning, has been an overburden on golf. The Land Reform Act would be the first one I would refer to, but more recently the Licensing Scotland Act, which I understand was really aiming at curbing antisocial behaviour in city centre streets late on a Friday, Saturday evening, but actually has added real significant cost and time pressure to golf clubs in the way that they manage their licensing activity. Now, golf clubs don't tend to have much of an issue with antisocial behaviour late on a Friday and Saturday night, so that's had a really adverse effect on us. That was very unpopular legislation with golf clubs. Yeah. On the other hand, the areas we've really concerned ourselves with are around employment law and health and safety, and we've invested quite heavily in providing a solution for golf clubs so that they have a free service to help them wade through the red tape, if you like, right, rather than incur those costs themselves. If that answers your question.
I know Richard Simpson wants to come back in unless any of our witnesses want to add on that specific point before I allow Mr Simpson in. No, okay, Richard?
It's actually just trying to develop the same point. I mean, we've had 2 specific examples here, but someone else mentioned child protection. It seems to me that one of the problems we've got is that there are governing bodies who have different sizes and strengths. And so my question is there any coordination so that the smaller bodies or areas of sport that actually maybe have only got a small voluntary governing body are being supported in things like child protection training? Are you getting support from Sports Scotland or from some external national organisation to provide the necessary training in child protection and some of the other areas you mentioned on health and safety? Because it clearly is impossible for all governing bodies to provide all their people with the training that they need. So what's happening in terms of structures and training on that?
So that's quite a specific point. Someone to comment on that? Yeah, Mr Drummond?
Yeah. I suppose in terms of what we deliver and make available for volunteers, especially for child protection, especially for first aid courses, for example. They're not specific to football, so we would always make them available to, you know, if someone from swimming or hockey or whatever wanted to come on these courses. They're advertised on our website. We work with Sport Scotland on it as well to make sure that they're aware of the courses, and if there are people from other sports that want to come on it, then there's opportunities for them to do so.
And do they?
Yes, yeah, quite. I don't know why. We've got a quite heavy following from the kind of horse riding fraternity that seem to come on a lot of our first aid courses. I don't know why, but yeah, they do. So,
Ms. Pryde, do you want to come in on that?
Yep, sure. Just support what David's saying. We run a number of child protection courses. We try and link in with other clubs across the area. Our sport is regionalised, as many of the other sports are as well. So we try and work within our area to try and produce some coordinated programmes available. We've tried to link in with our sports that are common to us as well, that offer similar opportunities in terms of gymnastics, some of our other aquatic disciplines as well, so that the crossover is fairly similar in terms of child protection issues. Our governance for PVG checks and child protection is fairly strong, just in terms of our sport and how it, I suppose that just the nature of the sport and what it's like. So we're quite confident that our governance is fairly on the money there in terms of child protection. But I mean, we share across all sports. It's with our regional model, the emphasis is on trying to share resources, because not every governing body, like you say, in terms of if they're smaller, can offer that support to all their members. So we would always work with the sports within our area to try and make sure that we support them as best we can. Same with child protection courses. We recently did In Safe Hands course, which is a child protection officer course, but governing bodies went along to that. So it wasn't for child protection officers, it was for governing bodies to go along, and it's just an opportunity to share good practice, see what they're doing, try and support each other the best we can. So there's definitely cross-sport working there.
That's helpful. Mr. Thompson, you want to come in on that?
Absolutely. You know, sports work together with the support of Sport Scotland, with the support of regional hubs, with the support of local authorities. There's a lot of activity, coaching, you know, medical, physio, PVG. There's a whole raft of things that volunteers can tap into. The key question is, though, the volunteer tapping into it and having the time to tap into it. I don't think any volunteer would sit back in a club and say, we shouldn't be doing these things. I think, as I go back to my first point, volunteers are motivated people, and many of them are very, very intelligent people that understand the need to be compliant against rules and regulations. It's the time that they have to do these things. And, you know, examples like time off work to go and do that, business, local authority, employers supplying the time off work to support volunteers, known volunteers within a sporting context, that's the time. You know, a lot of these people are stretched with their time. You talked about your own wife. You know, that is a real issue about time.
Mr. Smith, you want to come in?
Yes, just agree with everything that's just been said there. It is about the time. It was me that mentioned child protection earlier on, and I was specifically thinking of the retrospective checking that's coming in from the end of October, I think, to do with all the people who've previously undergone disclosure checks. And people realise why this has to happen. I mean, the start of the retrospective checking has been delayed, but over the next 3 years, it is going to mean an awful lot of work for the governing bodies and all those volunteers who are already busy in the clubs in terms of undergoing that process.
Thank you. And Richard, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, it was just that my second thing was on the question of volunteering. You know, we assume that that's in out of work hours, but have any of you had any contact with Scotland's Healthy Working Lives, the organisation which is supposed to support small and medium-sized businesses? And, you know, part of them is in Healthy Working Lives is actually to encourage activity that will enhance the workers' well-being and health. And therefore, part of that should really be volunteering and actually getting involved and engaged in sporting activity. And it's also beneficial to companies that if they've got links. I think, for example, in the rugby field, that Auckland has 200 touch rugby teams run by the business world, and it's, you know, it's regarded as being part of their function to support that sort of physical activity because it's beneficial. So I just wonder if any of you have had contact or with Scotland's Healthy Working Lives, or, you know, have even heard of them.
Anyone want to take up that? I'm guessing by the lack of response, that means no one. If anyone has heard of that particular organisation, could they let us know? I think we'll take that as a no, Dr. Simpson. That's me worth following. Can I maybe ask an addition in relation to this? I just want to clarify we've got this right. The governing bodies here are of such scale that in terms of child protection and other support, you can filter that down to your member organisations. And are you confident that Sports Scotland effectively networks with other, say, smaller governing bodies to make sure that they can all get that? Because you, for example, said that you make your expertise available to, say, the horse riding fraternity. So are you confident Sports Scotland provides that kind of link role? Mr. Smith?
Sports Scotland invest in Children First, which is an organisation which specialises in this area. They run meetings for lead officers from each sport. So I think that's how the information is cascaded down to the different sports.
We also heard in... So you want to go in just now, Mr. Drummond?
Sorry, I was just going to say, just further to Stuart's point as well, that as regional development managers, we sit within a group who all the different sports come together on a monthly basis for this type of agenda, and we discuss courses that are coming up and make sure that information is shared amongst members.
Thank you, because we heard in evidence last week that one of the issues in volunteering was that there's organisations, even successful sports clubs, fall off a cliff edge in terms of those that are actively participating in a particular sport or recreation. Once they give it up, the family members that are volunteering also give it up, and you're left with a vacuum in volunteers. And one of the models on the continent is larger sporting clubs, and more importantly networking between various different sports so they can share volunteers. So has either of the national governing bodies here given consideration to taking a model similar to that forward? Yeah, Ms. Pryde?
We have looked at it not specifically within club format, but within our events. We're looking at our national competitions here and trying to get volunteers from other sports just to support that. We perhaps look at sports that were more like ours, but there's no harm in kind of looking further afield, but certainly not in terms of clubs. We haven't gone down that avenue.
Is it Mr. Page? Yes.
I think in respect to your first point about volunteers leaving with family members, I think we need to realise that there is a volunteering life cycle out there, and we should celebrate the volunteer whilst they are given their time. I think it's important for us as governing bodies to be working with our club so that we have some form of succession planning in place. So when that key member leaves the club then doesn't fall apart. But that's for us throughout our regional teams that we have to work with the clubs to ensure that.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to come in on that? Yes, Mr. Salmon?
I think back to what Steve said earlier about defining what we mean by volunteers. I think for different types of volunteers, you have a different answer. I think I recognise the point you make at club level in terms of coaching. Very often a junior convener in a club will be the parent of an enthusiastic child. When that child leaves, that convener will give up. On the other hand, we have a number of volunteers who volunteer at regional or national level, and in a recent survey we found that 36% of them have been in post at least 6 years, and in many cases 20 or 30 years. So that's a very different model. They do that because they want to give something back. There is no family connection. So as I say, it's back to that definition of what do we mean by that volunteer, and there are lots of types of them.
Mr. Smith?
So much in canoeing have people from other clubs in other sports helping out in specific clubs, but we do have a lot of inter-club working. And the other thing that seems to have happened in the last few months is that people are sort of formalising the volunteer roles, and we're seeing across a number of sports, on the Sports Scotland website and in other places, clubs or governing bodies advertising for specific volunteers against a role, a bit like you would advertise an employed post. And I think the advantage of that is it can attract people from outside of that specific club or the sport, and it might actually help with the life cycle of parents and other people involved in clubs, because you've got another sort of thread of volunteers going through that club as well.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Now, yes, Mr. Thompson.
Within a rugby context, a rugby club is the heart of rugby within its community. So its raison d'etre is to provide rugby for that community. We've worked hard over the last 6 years to put in place an infrastructure of club development officers in partnership with local authorities, in partnership with clubs, in partnership with the government, funding through cashback, to actually link up with the school. The next most important thing, in fact, the most important thing beyond the club is the school. And we talk about culture. If you want to start to sustain volunteers in a sporting context, you have to have a culture that is driven over years and years and years, that pulls people into the sport, gives them good experiences and sustains them into the sport beyond when they drop off, and also creates a succession planning culture that creates a give back. We've got very strong club culture across Scotland, where some great work goes on from people whose children have long gone, from people who have been former players but want to give back. But that has been bred through a culture of giving back. And that culture all starts in school. And where we've had limited success or real success in increasing the amount of school rugby, I'm concerned that that culture, not starting in schools and just being isolated in clubs, will limit the amount of people that are involved in sport and limit the amount of people that are involved in sport to those children whose parents will take them along. And if we're true about creating sport and culture, we have to be open to all. So we have to be in schools. School sport has to play a far higher role, because in there, that's where you can recruit children, you can train children to deliver back to the primary school sector, to the first year sector when they're in senior school, and create a culture of give back that then sustains them into volunteering beyond just being a parent.
I suspect that's something we will come on to later. See, I want to move away from volunteering onto some other matters and a couple of other MSPs wanting in. Can I go to Jimmy D, MSP?
Thank you, Convener. Thank you to the panel members for their contributions this morning. I'd like to go back to something that Mr Thompson said earlier, which was about the positive contribution that sport can make to social cohesion. And I'm interested in the wider community benefit of sport, and I'd like to know what specific activities the sports governing bodies are actively promoting to engage in sport young people who are at risk of involvement in antisocial behaviour, and that's particularly important in our most deprived areas of Scotland. So I'd like to know specifically what you're doing to address that. And then I'd like to also pick up on a point which again I think Mr Thompson made about the need to recognise and celebrate the contribution of volunteers. And I'm wondering again what the sports governing bodies are doing specifically to address that point. I'm aware, for example, that the swimming governing body has annual awards. I just wonder whether perhaps you may already provide an award for volunteers, or if you don't, if that's something that you would consider, and whether the other sports governing bodies would reflect on that suggestion.
Ms Pryde, I suspect we should go to you first to answer that.
So we have our annual awards that are on every year. We have a number of volunteering categories, so it's not just one volunteer that gets recognised. In addition to that, Sports Scotland provide volunteer awards throughout the year as well that all sports can access also. As part of our volunteer strategy, we recognise that it's not just awards. Volunteers don't just want awards, they want recognition in terms of a thank you, a letter. We tweet quite a bit, we're on Twitter quite a lot, and we tweet about our volunteers, we put pictures up. It's just raising the profile really of what they're doing. Going back to your first point, we have a programme called Swim for Change, which is a leadership programme. It's specifically for 15 to 19-year-olds that are not in education or employment or training, and in socially deprived areas. What we're trying to encourage them to do is to come on a course. They go through their lifeguard training, their level 1 teaching award, and at the end of that they're put into a work placement or a voluntary placement, whether it's in a local authority, a trust or in a club programme, and that's a very specific targeted programme at socially deprived areas. We do have some funding for that through the Comic Relief, but it's not a government-funded programme, so we're kind of limited with what we can do. At the moment, we're trying to pilot it in certain areas, but we would love to run that across all 32 local authorities.
That's a fantastic example that you've just given. Sorry,
could we give others an opportunity to see what they do, so we can just open up the wider conversation? I'll let you back in first to comment on that. Mr Page, followed by Mr Smith.
Just following on from Sarah, we in cricket work with ASDA. We have the ASDA Volunteer of the Month Awards, which runs from April all the way through to September, where we recognise one volunteer on a monthly basis. Now, they can be coaches, committee members, the club stalwart, someone who's done a sterling piece of work for the club. Now, this is the third year of that partnership. We don't have an annual awards. We just do it monthly through our traditional season. But as I'm sure you'll appreciate with the weather, we haven't had a traditional season this year. On your first point around the social cohesion, we're working with our global governing body, the ICC, on non-traditional forms of the game. Obviously, many people are aware of the cricket in whites, hardball takes 7 hours on a Saturday. But how can we get very, very small-sided, very short games that we can use in multi-use games areas, get into areas of urban deprivation, even rural deprivation, that don't take a lot of equipment, can be played very, very quickly, and we engage people in a game and in some form of physical activity.
Mr. Smith?
On the subject of awards, the Canoe Association, like a lot of other associations, does have volunteer awards. We've had a Willing Hands Quake that's been going back probably 20 years. What we also try and do is, similar to other sports, is we try and profile our volunteers in our magazine, which comes out quarterly, to put a picture and to say what these people are doing, just to really spur other people on to think about what they could do too. In terms of social cohesion and sort of working in deprived areas, we haven't specifically had the opportunity to do much so far. Our aim so far is to support all the different clubs around Scotland so that they are the place that can take care of people if we can get them into the clubs. This last weekend I was up at our annual coaching conference up at Glenmore Lodge, the National Centre, and we had a keynote speech from Mark Delaney, who is the coach to David Florence, who's just won his second silver medal in the Olympics. And Mark Delaney himself went to 2 Olympics in 92 and 96. And he's the first to admit that if there hadn't been a well-run club in his neighbourhood, he would have probably ended up doing some completely different things other than canoeing as a sport. So our aim really is, so far, is to get the clubs to be safe, well-run, welcoming places to get people in. But we haven't yet managed to do any work in terms of how to get extra people into those clubs.
Mr. Smith, you should perhaps give a small plug for some work you have done in North Glasgow, because Glasgow Paddle Sports Association, supported by yourselves, recently trained 11 youth canoe coaches, some who'd never taken to the water before,
yes.
And they will be concentrating in deprived areas. So
yeah.
there is, just want to put that on the record, seeing as
Thank you.
You had the opportunity to do it, and I just thought I would give a plug for you there. Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, volunteer awards. We all run similar things. Ours are sponsored by RBS. Again, it's the monthly award that we run. Volunteer of the Month, Club of the Month, Player of the Month, Try of the Month, and then they go to an annual awards dinner at Murrayfield, which is a great event. And then we push them forward to the Sports Scotland Award. So, yeah, we try to do that. We use the social media, Facebook page to promote these stories. We send videos down to clubs. The RBS generally give us their TV team, and we go down and make DVDs of clubs and club activity, so that then the clubs themselves can promote what they do within their own community to sponsors. So that's a good programme. As far as social inclusion and working and pushing the boundaries of rugby back, we're passionate about pushing the boundaries of rugby back into areas where we've not been, and through good support from the government, through Cashback for Communities, we are now running rugby in areas that we've never been into before. Inverclyde and Methil and Fife, we've got 2 good programmes there, again in partnership with Wooden Spoon, the rugby charity, around about non-NEETs children, 16 to 24. Street rugby has become a thing that we do in partnership with the community safety partnerships and local authorities and street bobbies. So there's a lot of area, but it's not just doing these things, it's actually making sure that inspiring children or giving children is continued opportunity. So where we go is, how does that link then back to the club? Does it link via school, then get schools playing against each other, to then get down to a club? It's tying all that back together, and our regional development managers spend a lot of time working with people in local authorities, in other sports, in schools, to ensure that happens.
Jim, you were wanting back in on that?
I don't think we've heard from
Mr.
SFA yet.
Yeah. In terms of the award scheme that we operate, we very much are similar to some of the guys as well. It's regional awards on an annual basis, where we celebrate the role of the volunteer and working in adult football, women's football, youth football, and so on and so on. They're then promoted to our national awards, which again take place annually, which will be later this month actually, and that's a kind of award programme which is endorsed by McDonald's and Sunday Mail as well. In terms of football and trying to engage and work in the kind of diversionary area, we've got three key programmes which are all fully funded through the Scottish Government's Cashback initiative. Our School of Football programme, which is probably, I suppose, our flagship one in that sense, where we work in schools across the country. We've got 22 schools of football, 5 in the southeast of Scotland here, where it's a social and academic programme where we have the children who are in first and second year at secondary schools who are maybe starting to become a little bit wayward and not necessarily engaging in school. We use football as a tool to kind of hook them back in, and essentially what we do is we give them a session a day of football. It replaces one of their normal subjects, your home economics, your religious studies, even English and maths in some cases as well, and we use that to hook them back into school. The main thing with that programme is that we do find that they are staying on at school for longer. The statistics out there, they all set above the average for school attendance, which is great, and that really is the main evidence we look for to make sure that programme's working. The other two, street football, it's about getting kids playing the game, doing it in a way that allows them just to go and play the game, and very much just trying to get them off the street and playing something. And the final one for us is our free coach education for 16 to 25-year-olds, where we deliver coach education to them, and then we try and get them into local clubs or local authority programmes where they become more engaged in what they're doing in the communities.
Mr. Salmon, do you want to add?
Yes, please. In terms of awards, like everybody else, we have an annual awards programme for a variety of categories, and again, like rugby, sponsored by RBS. In terms of the social inclusion, we have a junior programme branded as Club Golf, which has enjoyed the support of successive governments since it was launched in 2003. And our overarching objective there is to provide the opportunity for every 9-year-old to have the opportunity to play golf. And this year we delivered to over 40,000 9-year-olds through the P5 year in curriculum time. That's over 81% of the P5 population. Now that by definition means that it's a game for every single child, irrespective of where they live, what their family circumstances are. Historically, you got into golf if your father or your mother or your auntie or uncle played golf, whereas now we can see a whole new generation of golfers coming through who have no golfing pedigree, if you like. So that's what's happening in golf.
Jim, do you want to come back in?
Just very briefly, Convener, thank you. I've been very impressed by the range of examples that we've heard from the sports governing bodies this morning. I'd be interested in receiving some further detail and evidence on figures to back up the very helpful examples that you've given. So if we can have a bit more, not today, but in writing, on what the level of funding is, where that funding is coming from in terms of cashback for communities, sponsorship and government funding, I think that would be useful. I was very interested in what Mr Drummond had to say about the evaluation of what the impact of the programmes actually is. So that when you gave the example of the schools of football and the impact that has on allowing or encouraging young people to stay on at school for longer, I think those kind of outcomes are very interesting. So if there's any evaluation that's been done on the work that you're doing that you can share with us, I think that would also be very helpful.
Okay, and that's something that the witnesses could maybe provide in writing after this, and maybe allow some of our members back to take it forward. Mr Smith-Drew, would you like to?
Thank you, Convener. I wanted to return to the issue of multi-sport clubs, which I think you raised yourself, Convener. It seems to me, particularly from the previous evidence session that we had, there's a number of issues here that I'll maybe just set out and then ask you for some reflections on as to whether multi-sport clubs are at least a partial solution to that. One is that the sport that a child begins at, say, 8 or is passionate about at 8 might not be the sport that they want to be involved in at 14. That there's competition between different groups of sport, competition for volunteers, competition for facilities, and frankly competition for the children who are most likely to be active. And where that leaves then other children. There's competition also for public support and support from other sporting organisations for your particular discipline. So if you are at school and your school is promoting rugby or it is promoting swimming or it's promoting cricket, but you don't want to do that particular sport, then all we've really done by that public support is encourage those who are most likely to be active anyway and haven't perhaps identified with the children who are less likely to come forward to be active, the sport that is right for them. So it seems to us that from the last session it was presented that multi-sport clubs were a big part of the solution to this, and that community sport hubs were really going to try and drive that multi-sport club agenda. But we haven't heard anything from the government bodies about how they particularly are taking forward multi-sport clubs. So I wondered if we could have any examples from the individual governing bodies of where they have actually pursued that model.
And I don't think there were examples before, but if you've thought of one now, that would be very useful. And if you can't think of examples, could you tell me how you would take that suggestion forward? Because I think
I suppose the question that I asked Convener, given what we heard last week, is that if those examples are not there, why aren't they there?
Anyone want to take that challenge? Yeah, Mr. Thompson.
We've had a long success, well, a good success with Lismore Rugby Club. That have now a multi-sport hub that involves cricket, football, and rugby all down at the same venue, not far from here actually. But the reality is that took 16 years of hard work from committee people in these various clubs to pull together. To me, you've gone about multi-sports and access to children. Again, I go back to the point, that all starts at school. And rugby, we're passionate that we should have sport for football, all sorts of sport being played at school. So every child, in secondary schools especially, every child has an opportunity to take part and to actually find what sport is right for them. Too often, as you've highlighted, sport is dependent on one individual volunteer in a school that does things, and his likes or his wants or his needs. It's not pupil focused. And so therefore you're always limiting your talent pool into, or channeling people and using, pooling on the same type of children. And to me, sport has been marginalised over the years from an over-complication of the whole process, that we now have a distinction between physical education, physical activity and sport that is unhealthy. And sport has been marginalised by that. And if we are honest about wanting children to take part and have opportunities, we have to have multi-sports clubs in schools. That's where all children are. Now, we as governing bodies and some bigger governing bodies can back that up with a good club infrastructure to support that, but we have to go to where the children are, and that's in schools.
Anyone else want to comment on that? Mr. Page?
I'll just take us back to the Pathways into Sport inquiry that we were talking about in the lobby on the way over. In that we started to debate those issues, I can't remember how many, 3-4 years ago, about the young persons getting their first taste of sport at that primary school, and who's the delivery agent? What is the training that young person is receiving in those physical literacy skills? Who is delivering that, and who is best placed to deliver that? Now, I'm not going to sit here and say it isn't the PE teacher in the primary school, but we're the sports specialists, and I think we've got a very, very important part to play in that. I'll just echo what Colin said about that multi-sport club or the sports club, that we could provide the quality external exit route for that young person to go into. But I just think we need to revisit some of the evidence that was given at the Pathways into Sport inquiry 3-4 years ago.
Yeah, Mr. Thompson, yeah.
I'll come back into there. If that is going to work, it has to be integrated. It has to be integrated between PE, between physical activity and between sport. And it has to be coordinated at a local level with local decision making that's right for that level. But if we're serious about it, you know, we've heard inspire a generation throughout the summer, but if that generation has no opportunity to participate in what they're watching, then what's the point in inspiring them?
I'm just conscious that Drew Smith had maybe I would take these points on board, but Drew Smith had actually said what are the governing bodies doing now. So it's a given that you're putting on record that you think schools should have to do more and they should be a hub for that kind of sporting and physical activity, and the committee will look at that, of course, but your national governing bodies, you know where your clubs are, you could inform your clubs that this would be a good thing to do, and there are clubs in every town across the country who are doing rugby, who are doing football, who are doing netball, who are doing basketball, who are doing canoeing, who are doing all kinds of things, and they might not be talking to each other. You're the national governing bodies, so we're saying you can wait for schools to get it right, or you can tell us what you're doing now. And I think that's what we're kind of asking. So it's what you are doing now to make links with other sports rather than just waiting for schools. But I do take on board that schools need to do more. Ms Pryde, I see you.
So we have a couple of examples of how we've worked in community sports hubs. In Forrester High School down in Edinburgh, we have a top-up programme, our national top-up programme. Now, part of that programme, we had a number of partnerships working there. We had Scottish Swimming, Sport Scotland, the high school, the active schools, local authority, and also the local swimming club got involved there as well. So we kind of worked across all agencies there. So that's a very specific swimming example of how we delivered one programme, very focused. At the same site, though, we're now working with a number of other sports. So we have netball, hockey, basketball and swimming, doing a multi-sport approach. It's very specific, again, to coach education. So it's not exactly about the children that are coming in to play the sport, but it's all about how we're delivering a coordinated approach to UKCC through a number of different sports, and hopefully out of that we will be able to have a better relationship. In terms of swimming, we are trying to encourage our clubs to engage with the community sports hubs. I think it's early stages, and a lot of the local authorities, it's not one size fits all, very different. A lot of local authorities have virtual hubs, so it's not just about being very facility based, because not every facility has a swimming pool, not every school has a swimming pool or a gymnasium or a football pitch. So it's about trying to create perhaps a virtual hub as well, a sharing of information so the local community can get access to information about what clubs are out there. But you know, we will try to encourage our swimming clubs to engage in the local community and make sure that that's there. I think for us, about 10 years ago, we started to look at community partnerships, again, very sports specific, bringing together clubs in the same local authority to try and share resources. Clubs are struggling in terms of pool time and volunteers, swimmers, etc. So we tried to create a model where clubs would come together under one shared vision. They would still retain their identity, but they would just come together and try and work around the same issues, I guess. So we are in favour of community sports hubs, and I think if they have a focus, then they will be successful. And again, one size doesn't fit all, and I'm sure the other sports will have a view on how they can engage with their community sports hubs.
That's helpful, Ms Pryde. Stuart Smith, do you want to come
in? As what I would call a medium-sized governing body of sport, the Canoe Association doesn't actually have any regional staff, and because cashback is only open to a couple of sports rather than all sports, we don't have the ability to invest in a network of development officers. So what we try and do where we can is everything that we do is through partnership with other people. I know of examples of joint, canoe and sailing clubs, and even examples where you've got a canoe club and a rowing club in the same location. For me, the critical thing is that the clubs are talking to each other and working together. And for me, the less critical thing is whether it's actually one club or not, because there might be certain reasons, and whether it's to do with the insurances that you pay for certain activities to insure the club and what it does. It might be really quite complicated to actually amalgamate all sorts of different clubs, because they will work in different ways, they'll have different seasons. But for me, the critical thing is joint working, and that's what we try and do. But we are doing that through our volunteers and through the volunteer club committees rather than through any regional staff, because we don't have any.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Drummond?
Yeah, I think in terms of community sport hubs, absolutely we would support that. However, from a football point of view, our priority really needs to be to develop and put in place systems for the football club in the first instance, to make sure that they have the best possible support. Once that's in place, then we can then start to look at how do they start to engage with other sports directly. And it probably opens up a whole new debate, but really if we want to try and use the schools as magnets for community sport, we need to look at how do we open up the school estates. Now, there are some places in Edinburgh, Forrester High School, for example, that opens up and really has embraced the model of community sports. But that's not the case, certainly across Edinburgh and certainly not across Scotland.
Simon, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think fundamentally we support community sports hubs. I think we're interested to see how they develop. I think we're fortunate. I completely agree with the points that were made about school sport. But we're very fortunate in, as I've already said, we have a very, very successful schools programme for golf. Over 40,000 9-year-olds every year being introduced to golf. Our challenge is then making sure those 9-year-olds have an exit route to go to a local club or facility to continue their interest in golf. And over the last couple of years, we've had a 15% conversion from that schools programme to the club programme. But critically, we've got over 300 clubs and facilities providing that exit route, and approximately 30 of those are not golf clubs. Now, going back to the previous question from Jim, that's critical in making sure that we can reach kids in these deprived areas who wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity. They don't have to go to the typical or stereotypical private members club. They can go to a community club. And in areas such as Glasgow and Dundee and Aberdeen to a lesser extent, that's absolutely critical. But that model's been there really for some time. You know, in Glasgow, community sports clubs have been going for, you know, before community sports hubs, I think, were really dreamt up.
That's very helpful. Jude, do you want to go back in on any of that? Okay. Nanette, do you want to?
Yes, I'd like to broaden out the discussion a little bit into participation. I mean, we've heard a lot about the importance of in getting young people interested in sport and involved in clubs. And what about the other groups that don't participate so much, like women, like older people who maybe drop off the end having been interested in childhood? Are the governing bodies doing anything specific with these sort of groups to attract them and keep their interest? Because, I mean, clearly I'm in the older age group, and I do think that physical activity and perhaps sport are really very, very important throughout life.
Ms. Pryde, yes.
We've recently put in place a participation team. We have 2 participation officers underneath a participation manager, specifically to look at active adults, early years, intervention programmes to make sure that we are hitting everything. A couple of specific examples that we've put in place. We rolled out a programme of, well, it was Swim Gym, Swim Fit, so it was about trying to engage adults to come along and do a more programmed swim, maybe under the leadership of a coach or perhaps just through cards, you know, on the side of the pool. Aqua Zumba is one of our other areas, so we are trying to go with the trends in other fitness industries and trying to bring it into the pool, try and encourage people from the gym to perhaps come along to the pool as well. A number of local authorities have given us a little bit of feedback about women-only sessions. We've seen it across the country that happens a lot. However, I think the issue is around cost for women-only sessions. I think local authorities just cannot afford to be able to put a girl lifeguard on. So there's kind of barriers to that as well. But we do have a lot on our agenda at the moment around about participation. It's not just about club development, it's not just about performance, but we do recognise that participation is a huge area for us.
We've recently invested in two new members of staff per each of the 6 regions, so 12 new staff members across the country. One being a club development officer for girls and women's football, where we're looking at driving participation, especially with the under-9s, under-11 age groups, and getting them into clubs and getting them into some of our quality mark accredited clubs. And that's very much their key focus, but also to try and engage more with the females who would like to be involved at a coaching capacity or a volunteer capacity within club structures as well. And that's very much our remit, is to try and put on coach education courses or put the appropriate training courses on for these individuals who want to be part of it. The other one that we've recently invested in, both of these posts are through the Cashback initiative as well, both funded through Cashback, is our football equity officer. And again, there's equity officers based in the 6 regions in Scotland, and they're very much in post to try and drive participation and engage far more with the BME community. It's, for us, in terms of football, it's very much an untapped area, and I would hold my hands up and say it's still very much a learning area for us all, actually. But we're aware that there are a number of people out there from the BME community who are either wanting to play football, are playing football, but don't necessarily know the direct route into it, or just want to volunteer and be part of the game. So it's certainly something they're working on a lot just now.
Mr. Salmon?
Yeah, sure. In terms of where we're at now with those various groups, in terms of women's membership of golf clubs, only 13% of total membership is female. That's something we're uncomfortable about, but that's something that's reflected throughout certainly Great Britain and Ireland, and to a lesser extent the continent of Europe. So that's an issue with the game. In terms of the age aspect, that's a very interesting thing because the average age of golfers, according to recent research, is 42, but the average age of golf club members is nearer 60. So that's an issue for golf. Golf is lucky in that it's a game for life. You don't have to hang up your clubs, as it were, when you reach your mid-30s. And that's a financial issue for golf clubs, because what golf clubs tend to do is offer discounts for seniors when they've been a member for so many years or reached a certain age. And now, because of the ageing profile of clubs, the books aren't balancing, because everybody's enjoying, the vast majority are enjoying this huge discount at golf clubs. But going back to what we're trying to do about this, I keep coming back to club golf, but it's a key strand of our strategy. In the schools program, 49% of the kids that go through that program are girls, as you would expect with an inclusive program like that. But critically, the transition rates through, we're seeing on average a 26% participation rate amongst girls when they get through to the club stages. So if you compare that to the 13% where we are right now, we're certainly improving that for the future. I'm not saying we're happy with 26%. We'd like to continue to grow that, but it's going in the right direction. And in terms of adult ladies, we've just piloted this year an adult participation program which seeks to target adults who don't play golf, who have no background in golf, introduce them to the game in a fun, socially inclusive and structured way, leading to golf club membership. And that's been particularly successful with women, almost to a sort of 90% factor in comparison to men. It really does appeal to ladies because they come along in groups. It has that social aspect.
Thank you. Stuart Smith, do you want to come in?
Yes. As you'd expect, canoeing, in terms of going out on the water and getting wet, might appeal to more males than females. But actually, the difference is highlighted even more when you start to look at, say, club facilities. So a canoe club like Fourth Canoe Club, established in 1934, producing multiple Olympians, doesn't actually have running water. So there's no toilets, there's nowhere to get a drink, there's no showers, very, very basic facilities. And that's got several hundred members in the club. So it's always been a slight issue in canoeing in terms of attracting equal numbers of both genders, because the odds are against you in terms of the activity, but also the facilities that you've got. What we have done is we've had a big push in terms of the introduction of the UKCC Endorsed Coaching Awards, and the fact that they can be done on a modular basis rather than having to go on, a week course. We've seen that the number of females going through and getting, say, our Level 1 entry award is 32% of the people, compared to 20% before we introduced. So we've got a 10% rise excuse me, in the number of female coaches coming through. And similar to swimming, we've also experimented with some female-only sessions, which have gone down very well. And part of the Year of Active Scotland, we, excuse me, I'm losing my voice here. We ran a Go Canoeing program, specifically targeting older participants, because similar to golf, there's no barriers to people who are in their later years doing canoeing, which is a sort of low impact sport. It's not that you're going to be damaging the joints. And that was very successful. So we've seen people then get involved in their local clubs because of it. All governing bodies, as far as I'm aware, are working through the Equality Standard in Sport, which is a way of governing bodies demonstrating that in terms of all the different areas of equality, whether it's disability, ethnic origin, age, gender, sexual orientation, that we are as open and accessible to all participants as possible. And as part of that, we are devising sometimes pilot projects to really experiment to see how we can attract more of different groups into the sport where there's underrepresentation.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Does Mr. Thompson or Mr. Page want to comment on this?
Go.
Thank you, Mr. Page.
I think we as a sport in cricket realised a number of years ago we had an issue with a number of females playing the game, or a lack of it. So we, with the help of the ICC, our global governing body, created a women's development officer post, because at that stage we needed a figurehead to drive things forward for us. What that's resulted in is we now have more females playing the game. We now have more clubs dedicated to females in terms of number of clubs and also number of female teams. To help us at the younger age group, we have an insistence in our National Primary Schools Cup that a third of the team must be female. So that at the P6 age group, we've got 1,800 girls playing in our National Primary Schools Cup. Our club accreditation programme for all of our Cricket Scotland League, which in effect is our National League clubs, must have girls' teams. So we're trying to work with the clubs through the stick and the carrot approach to get more females playing the game. And I'm proud to sit here and say that the ICC, our global governing body, recognised us and presented us with a Global Development Award for 2011 for having the best development programme in the world for females, which is something we're rightly proud about. We haven't finished yet. We've still got a long way to go. And in terms of older people, I think if you look at the profile of the participants that you see on a Saturday playing cricket in some of the parks, they're not just, I take Andy's point earlier, it's not a game that people are giving up when they're 30. People are carrying on going. I think we have a role as governing bodies to keep older people engaged in the game, not just in a playing capacity, but retaining them at some point within the clubs, that we don't lose their expertise. I think we're moving in the right direction. One thing I'd just like to raise, and it brings us back to a question Jim asked us earlier. I found myself, when I've been answering, the support of the ICC, whereas two of our governing bodies quite often start with the support of cashback. I think there's quite an issue there for sport and the programme to address, but I think I'll quite happily submit some further evidence through to Jim on that one.
Yeah, and I think we'll look forward to having that. We'll have to look at the funding that underpins the various sports as well as a committee. Mr Thompson, did you want to come in?
Yep, particularly with women and girls rugby. It's a growth area for us. What we've done is put in place across 8 regions part-time girls-specific development officers to look at the growth of the girls' game aged 15 and under and 18 and under. For the last 3 years, we've run a Schools Cup competition, which has been very successful. So that is starting to go. Then we transfer into a university, especially in college rugby, where we've got a number of girls' teams, and then to adult female teams. The numbers aren't as good as we'd like to be in the senior game, but we are working with the clubs to do that. We've integrated, as you know, we used to have Scottish Women's Rugby Union and Scottish Rugby Union. We're now one integrated organisation, which it doesn't matter if it's male, female, men, women, boys and girls. We develop rugby, and where we've got interest, we try and support that. We encourage our clubs to do the same. In fact, we have got some funding for clubs who specifically run women's sections to positively promote the development of women's rugby. Going into the age, obviously rugby is probably not a game that we can go on and on playing, although some people think they can do. I had that moment when at 40 I thought, no, maybe this isn't a good thing to be doing anymore, when I was a wee bit sore the next day. So the life cycle, somebody talked about life cycle volunteering. We've got a life cycle of rugby. We like to retain people, whether that's through coaching, signposting people into coaching, into refereeing, into being committee volunteers, to keep them in the game, because it's more than just the physical, it's the mental well-being of being part of a community club, and sport can play a big role with people feeling part of a group and not feeling alienated. So sport has, as people get older, sport is a good opportunity, and sports clubs have a good opportunity to help with mental health issues and all that sort of stuff. As far as other areas, we have been promoting touch rugby within our clubs. So a lot of clubs are touch rugby, which again you can run into, you can take part in that in older age groups as well. And we have our golden oldies sections within our clubs. That's what we do.
That's very helpful. Nanette, do you want back in on that?
No, I think that has been helpful. I'm very familiar with the golden oldies setup. I know 1 or 2 people involved in that.
Okay, thank you very much, Nanette. George Adam, you've waited very patiently. George.
Thank you, Convener. I just want to go on about the participation and access to sport and fitness, because I take on board the school estate issues, and I know there are quite a lot of issues with that, but as an ex-councillor, I was of the opinion that sometimes local authorities just put some of their investment in the wrong places. They might have been able to get the funding for that area, but put a basketball court in a certain area and nobody used it. You know, and my concern was that as a councillor, we at one stage, our Director of Social Work said at a local area committee, why don't we have a pensioners' playground, which was effectively a gym, outdoor gym, £20,000. Everybody thought it was a laugh. We did it, and it's used regularly now. But in the same area, we also managed to get £220,000 from Tennis Scotland to upgrade our tennis courts. Now that gave access to people from the local housing estate to a sport that they wouldn't have actually had a look at in the before. Now, my first question would be, is it not just more if the local authorities are more focused and just get the job done and provide the facilities? And also, with regards to participation, you have clubs like the rugby clubs, like Colin Thompson said, where I was at Kelburn Hockey Club on Saturday. Emily Maguire came back with her bronze medal, but it's got generations of families that have been at that club. And how do we get that throughout the other clubs? Because that's what we need to strive for. We need to get these people that, you know, these young men and young women that are living in different areas get involved. How do we get them access? I know in Renfrewshire we've had the Street Stuff campaign, which effectively has been street football, but the local St Mirren football team have helped us. They've got the credibility. They can actually talk to children of a certain age. So we've got the rugby coaches as well there. So how do we get these young people and these people to get them to be like, as Colin said, some of the rugby clubs are?
Rush to Renfrewshire to look at the template for how it's done, George. But
no, that was just my word.
But that was just your word, absolutely. But I think two aspects. One is, how do we make sure local authorities invest strategically rather than just invest, I think was the first part. And second, I think, was related to Mr Thompson's earlier comments about how you get that, you promote that kind of club ethos. So does anyone want a first bite at that? Well, Mr Thompson, yes.
I think we all understand that facility development is hugely important moving forward, and the only way you get good facilities is through good partnerships and good research of where to go and when to go. So we've been working with, Steve, Cashback again, and saying, with the Cashback for Communities funding and Sport Scotland, to look at funding our clubs and, where possible, tying into existing local authority funding, so that you make an already planned project even better for more people. And so the key to it is actually working with Sport Scotland, working with the government, working with local clubs and local authorities to actually understand the need and then put in place what is best for that situation. Rugby, we generally, a lot of rugby clubs have their own facilities, and they're very lucky to do that. And we know that they can be used by other, be it sports, be it groups, and a lot of our clubs have actually expanded into other areas doing that and becoming more like a social centre than a particular rugby club. Culture, Moan, that's from years and years. And this is where I probably have in many respects, we need to be honest, and we need to say that we've lost a lot of our sporting culture, because the culture from years and years and generation, that is built up within a club environment, and the whole thing sustains itself once you've got the complete model, from introducing to taking part to associations with school to then people forming it in there, and it's passed down from person to person. It's a culture. And I think in many areas, in many local authority areas, in many communities in Scotland, we've lost that culture because there's been a break at, say, the under-15 level or the under-18 level, or the second 15 has been left to go. And once it goes, it takes an awful lot of effort to get it back up. School sport, if I go back to school sport and give you some anecdotal evidence with us, we 6 years ago said we need to be in secondary schools. That's where all children are. That's where we need to be. That's where we need to support. And if you say about a culture within a school being 4 or 5 teams, one at each age group into the senior school, and that's something I'm sure we'll all be familiar with, where you start and you play for a team and then you go up the age groups. There are only 31 state schools in Scotland have a team at every age group in rugby. And for a lot of sports, I think it'll be less than that. And so we have got 260 schools playing rugby, but taking them from one team where they're at the moment to 2 teams, to 3 teams, to 4 teams is very, very difficult. And we need to build that if we are going to start to build and sustain cultures within local communities.
Okay, thanks, Mr Thompson. Mr Smith?
So this inquiry is into community sport, and as part of the question was around the culture and how to sustain and grow that culture. One of the challenges that canoeing faces, and this is not across all canoe clubs, but it does affect some, is that although canoeing has produced Olympic medals at the last 3 Olympic Games and 2 this time, the people who achieve those medals actually have to leave their clubs and go to England. So they have to go and train on other facilities because there are no facilities of the required standard. I'm talking artificial whitewater courses in Scotland, and that's where the athletes have to be so much of the time. So one of the things that is a drain on the culture of some of the clubs that we have in Scotland is that the aspiring athletes do actually have to leave, and there are no role models left. Just as we speak now,
does their funding go with them as well at the same time?
Well, when they tend to go, that tends to be when they're on the UK sport funding through GB Canoeing rather than Sport Scotland Lottery funding through the Scottish Canoe Association. But it just means that the kids who are coming through the ranks have no role models in Scotland. So at the moment, as we speak, the junior GB slalom team is coming back from the European Championships in Slovenia. 40% of that GB team is Scottish. And you know, you just dread to think what's going to happen in the future, because if those athletes really want to make it on the world and the Olympic stage, we don't have any facilities in Scotland that would actually meet their needs. 33% of the GB junior sprint team is Scottish. And again, those athletes, as things stand at the moment, you know, may well have to move down to England. The big project, and if I might just give this a quick plug at the moment, that really will help is the Pinkston project over at Glasgow, the Glasgow Paddle Sports Centre, because there will be, if that is built, and there's a funding shortage at the moment, there will be a 90-metre artificial course. It's not the international standard course that you would need to, say, run an Olympics or a World Championships, but it would make a huge difference to the athletes coming through, and they might actually be able to remain in Scotland.
Thank you, Mr Smith. Something I know very well. I visited the proposed centre recently, and I know there's some funding applications in the pipeline on that, so here's hoping they are successful. Mr Drummond?
Yeah, in terms of local authority investment, I guess that almost gets batted back to us as governing bodies. I think we have a duty to really know and understand our clubs in the first instance, and that will allow us to work with the local authorities to strategically place their investment in the right parts of the local authority and the schools. And by doing so, what that probably then in turn leads to is allows us to work with the club who hopefully benefits from these better facilities to grow a better infrastructure for the club as well. And it kind of, the two questions that you ask are very much linked in my eyes, because once you have these better facilities, certainly it can often be the catalyst for a club to really grow and develop and put structures in place and to support the volunteers that are part of their club and really grow that club ethos within it. I think the main thing that clubs can do really is to inspire and enthuse young people coming through and to provide pathways within their club all the way into the adult game. So the two are very much linked, because the clubs that we have, certainly in the south east of Scotland here, that have their own facilities, tend to be the best run clubs, tend to be the ones that have got the best ethos around them and the real club mentality around them.
Mr Salmon, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just really briefly, in terms of local authority investment, I think the key is for us as a sport to be clear on what our strategy is. And we've recently launched a facility strategy based on a very extensive facilities audit, which very clearly says what the sport needs to progress and achieve all its other goals in terms of facilities on the ground. And already we've had examples of that, meaning that some clubs and facilities have applied for funding and have been unsuccessful because their plans didn't align to the strategy. And on the other hand, much more focused funding on those applications that were aligned to the strategy. So that's been really successful. In terms of the club ethos, I think we've a challenge in golf in that very often local authorities seem to see themselves as the poor relation in terms of golfing provision, but we certainly don't see that being the case at all. And in terms of, again, of making it a sport for everybody, we see local authorities having a critical role, particularly in places like Edinburgh, South Ayrshire, Dundee, Aberdeen, where those municipal golf courses play a critical role in the player pathway. So we're spending a lot of time and effort with those local authorities. Again, Glasgow and South Ayrshire are the current examples to try and breed that club ethos that you talk about. I think it's critical.
Please.
I think we're the only indoor sport around this table, so it's difficult for us. We don't own facilities, we don't have clubhouses, our swimming clubs are very much down to what the facility can provide. We're fortunate that we do have a hand around the table in terms of our partnership with Sport Scotland, so any new facilities that come online or that are being planned, we do have an opportunity to input to see, around about the access for our club development programmes, our performance programmes as well. In addition to that, we do also have a facility strategy also that highlights some of our key priorities of what certain areas should have in terms of competition pools and other club development pools also. We have pool programming guide that really is a tool to help local authorities to try and trusts to try and programme their pools better so that they can have access for learn to swim programmes, adult and child club programmes, performance programmes also, so that they're making the best possible use of the pool time that they have. In terms of culture, I guess it's down to our community partnerships that we have where clubs come together under a shared vision that they're trying to develop an ethos, a culture of cooperation and cohesion to try and move things forward. I mean, we're envious of the sports that have clubhouses that can have that central point where they have a pint after a match or whatever. It's difficult for swimming, and I suppose it's more the virtual hubs that are created out of that.
Sarah-Pryde, can I ask you, given what we were saying before, are you aware of local swimming clubs that have approached other clubs that do have clubhouses? Could imagine they would be quite keen to see additional footfall to their clubhouses because that's a source of revenue and that would then give you a base. So is that something that your organisation sought to kind of develop?
Not at a national level. I think potentially some of our clubs may well have looked at that and linked in with other clubs within the area, and it's not something that we wouldn't rule out. You know, I think that potentially could be.
Sure. 2005 licence tonight.
I think that. Do you want to add to that? Or you get distracted by Mr. Adam there, Ms. Pryde. Do you want to?
Sorry, what was that?
No, I distracted
no, Ms. Pryde.
No, I was just saying it's really, I guess, clubs find their own culture and try to bring other clubs along with that. But I mean, as I said before, we are very much open to working with other governing bodies, working with other sports clubs, either through the vehicle of community sports hubs or, you know, any other vehicle. I guess our clubs are, we think, well organised through our accreditation scheme as well. We have well supported clubs, strong clubs, and we are willing to, you know, support other governing bodies with that.
I think we might just be fostering some form of arrangement here this morning. Mr. Salmon, did you want to?
Just very briefly, just to say we welcome that, but the Licensing Act would cause us some difficulties on that front. We'd have to circumnavigate those somehow.
Yeah, well, we're looking at barriers to greater participation and integration, so I'm sure they can be overcome, and you will talk after this meeting. Can I ask another brief question that follows on Mr. Adam talking about local authorities making appropriate strategic funding decisions in terms of infrastructure for community sport? And Mr. Smith, we'll not plug it again too much in terms of pinks and paddle sports, but yes, I've got an interest in that as well. But that was an example of, if it's successful, there'll be money from Sport Scotland, there'll be money from Glasgow City Council, but the benefits would accrue to a wider local authority area. Are there examples of local authorities working together to put community infrastructure in place which they can share? Does any of the governing bodies have you tried to foster those kind of relationships, or do you think that's something they should be doing more in the future? Mr. Thompson?
Not really local authorities. On Friday night there we launched Glasgow Warriors' first home game at Scotston, and that's a fantastic facility down at Scotston Leisure Centre and now the home of Glasgow Warriors, where, again, it's a lot of sports on the one campus with good support from Glasgow Life and Glasgow City Council. And that's, through working with them over the last 3-4 years, that's been fantastic. And that gives us a focus for rugby in Glasgow City Council, Western Barnshire, Eastern Barnshire and the surrounding council areas there, where we can pull in teams to that facility. For example, before the game on Friday night, we had teams from Whitecraigs, East Renfrewshire, from Carther across the river, you know, so in Glasgow City Council working together to do that, and Glasgow City Council have been more than happy about doing that and creating that venue, that hub for rugby, if you like, in the West. So that's been very positive.
Any other, Ms. Pryde?
So in terms of like all other sports here, we have a regional structure, and a lot of the time we try and pull our local authorities together. So for example, I'm in the east of Scotland and I'll link in with the 5 or 6 local authorities that are there, bring them together, looking at education opportunities, just to make sure that things are coordinated so there's no duplication of effort. The resources are limited at the moment and we need to make sure that we're making the best possible use of them. So we do have an informal structure there. In terms of clubs, our clubs fall under districts as well, and we try and support our clubs in one forum, looking to share good practice across each area. And then our regional managers come together in a national forum and we share ideas. So it does work across the regions.
It's an example of a governing body who are working across local authorities. And,
sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I know Drew Smith's wanting to come in and ask a supplementary on this.
Not on this, Bob, it's on a different thing, so when you...
Okay, in which case, can I ask George Adam, do you want to come follow up on any of that?
I'm just interested on, because I know local authorities would really like the idea of working within a bigger structure, because I know they're desperately looking for some. But I'm constantly, obviously my time in Renfrewshire Leisure Trust and here, we constantly agree with each other about how hubs are the way forward and how we should get everyone together. And we still don't seem to be doing it. So how do we get, what is the silver bullet? How do we manage to do this? You know, because I've had these same meetings for the past 5 years.
That may be a comment hanging on the wind, given the fact we've got about 10 minutes left of this particular session, and that's a kind of major question. But Ms Pryde does want to attempt to answer it. Yes.
I think you've got to be focused. If you have a focus and there's something to bring people together for, there's no point in having a forum and there's just for forum's sake or a hub for hub's sake. It's got to be a specific focus around it, whether it's education, whether it's participation, club development, performance. And I think we've found that way, if we have a particular focus, a particular interest, it does make a difference and it does make things happen.
Okay, thank you. Mr Thompson, briefly, because I want to try and fit in at least one more question before we...
to answer your question, it's about empowerment of the volunteers and it's supporting, and it's actually understanding which agencies are the support agency and which agencies are the delivery agencies. And sometimes people think that they're the deliverers. Actually, it's the volunteers that will deliver sports hubs, and everything else should be empowering them. And sometimes we've got probably that balance wrong.
Now, I know Drew Smith and Richard Simpson had intimated they'd like to ask an additional question, but Richard Lau, you've sat quite patiently. You've not spoken yet. Is there anything you would like to maybe...
Well, firstly, can I apologise for being late? I was held up my severe crash in the M8 for the last hour. The point that George made, I think, is very well made, and the concern that I've always had is that we have 32 councils who have sports development officers. Do they develop sport enough, and do they talk to the organisations, which they should do, before they develop a sport or a sports hall where sometimes it's not required?
Okay, now, given time constraints, there's probably not a lot we can get comments on that. Does someone want to take up the baton, though, on that? Mr Salmon, you've made the mistake of making eye contact with me, so yes, on you go.
Not my first mistake. I think very briefly, I think I wouldn't necessarily encourage anybody to assume that the presence of a sports development officer is good for the development of that sport. We have examples where it is, and we have examples where it absolutely isn't. And that's something, going back to my previous comment in regard to George's question, that we're working with those local authorities to say, if you're going to continue investing in these posts, for goodness sake, have them aligned to the strategy for the sport and the strategy for that local authority.
Any others? Okay, no takers on that. Now, there was two other...
They agrees.
Yeah, they may very well do. Now, given the time constraints, if possible, could Drew Smith and Richard Simpson, perhaps you could make the points you want to make, and we'll give a cut around the table if anyone wants to. They can decide which one they want to reply to. Drew, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, it's hopefully something that perhaps the sports involved can maybe just reply to us in writing on, but it's in relation to people who do receive support through cashback for communities. Can you give us a breakdown of where that money is spent across the country? What I'm interested in is where we can find out where the money comes from, in terms of the going into the pot for communities for cashback, but in terms of those organisations that then give it out around the country, can you supply us with some information writing about where it is spent?
Every year we submit a cashback report to government as part of the ongoing monitoring and reviewing, so we can send that across to you.
Thanks.
But if others that are involved, I know there's an issue that only some qualify for cashback funding and others don't, and that's been an issue we've noted here today. Richard, you had another question you wanted to add?
Yes, it's about health links and whether any of the groups have actually developed any links with general practitioners, primary care, in terms of prescribing for older people. It was really on the back of Nanette's question about involving older people in fitness programs, you know, and getting engaged in sport.
I think that's important that you've put that on record. Richard, someone to come in on that? Yeah, Mr Salmon, again, yes.
Again, I think I've written this down as my one thing on my wish list, really, as an outcome from today. I would love to see, for all sports, not just my own sport, GPs referring people with particular conditions to sport. And I know in golf it can be particularly conducive to people with various conditions because it's not overly strenuous on weak hearts or obesity or whatever it might be. So I think that's a massive opportunity for sport. But we've singly failed so far to achieve anything in that regard.
If others support that from the national governing bodies, could they maybe, just to get it on the record, can we hear some more on that, Mr Drummond?
Yes, I suppose it's a bit more difficult with football, with it just being such a, it's very different obviously to golf. However, we would definitely support the idea that where it's appropriate, if we can encourage those that are maybe a little bit more sedentary with their lifestyle, that we try and channel into sport.
Age.
It's something that we as governing bodies have to do more about. I think we've got an ageing population. I think it'd be remiss of us not to provide further activity for that client group. So yes, it's definitely something we need to do more.
I think rather than go around everyone, I think we're getting the nodding of heads there. Has anyone or any of the national governing bodies formed any formal relationships with perhaps a part of the National Health Service in terms of how you would monitor participation and the health benefits, that kind of thing? We were looking a little bit at that last week. Has any governing body got a kind of formal link there? Yeah, I think that's maybe something that... Sorry, Ms Pryde.
My colleagues in the audience there, yeah, we do have a formal link. I'm just not that well equipped to answer that, but we can provide some information about how we're developing with local authorities on that.
I think that would be quite useful, because I think some of the motivation behind Dr Simpson's question was that we all know the health benefits and the social benefits that derive from greater participation in sport and other physical activities, but sometimes measuring them can be difficult. Measuring them, of course, shouldn't be a barrier to getting on with doing it, but it is very helpful for public policy makers when we're allocating cash to different strands of public funding, if we can start to measure some of that. So that would be very useful. Now, we are almost at an end now, but I would give you the opportunity that if there's something that you wanted to say, such as I think Mr Salmon had wanted to say about that referral from GP for sporting and physical activity, if there's something that you want to get on the record, now would be your time to do it before we draw this particular session to a close. Oh, there we are, Mr Page, yes.
I think it'll be no surprise what I'm likely to raise. I think the issue of cashback needs to be further investigated and the broadening to other sports.
Okay, any other takers? This is your opportunity. You could inform our inquiry. Oh, Ms Pryde and then Mr Smith.
I would just echo what Steve's saying. We've been knocked back a couple of times for cashback, especially for our Swim for Change programme. So we've had to try and find funding from other avenues. So I would definitely welcome some further consideration of that.
See, money always gets a reaction when that comes up, Mr Smith.
I have to echo what's already been said, but also just to briefly come back to the Pinkston project. I mean, I mentioned it.
Even though I support it very briefly, perhaps.
Yes. I mentioned it in a performance context in terms of the top athletes, but actually the wider project is much more of a community, getting people into canoe sport in the heart of Glasgow, where there's a massive population within a very, very short distance around it with clean water. So it's a perfect way for the SCA to start developing canoeing for a whole raft of other people who haven't actually had the opportunity to take it up.
Thank you. Anything else? Last up, Mr Thompson, yes?
To re-emphasise, it all begins in schools and we need to look at school sport.
Okay. And Mr Drummond, I think you'll have an opportunity.
Quite happy with what's been said so far, yeah. Okay,
well, in that case, can I thank all our witnesses? We'll look carefully at the evidence you've given today, but this shouldn't be an end to your involvement in the sports inquiry. Do please follow the other evidence sessions that take place, and whilst you will have given written evidence and oral evidence now, if something else crosses your mind or you want to react or be proactive about something else you hear, then do get back to the committee in writing and let us know, because it will still form part of our analysis and conclusions that we draw from this. So can I thank you all for your time, and can we suspend briefly before we move to our next panel of witnesses? wait until Neil gets here and we'll get going as soon as we can. Okay, good morning everyone and welcome back to our inquiry into community sport, and we're going to move on to our second round table of the morning. And can I give a warm welcome to our fourth panel of witnesses on our community sport inquiry to Dr Cindy Gray, Research Fellow, University of Glasgow and football fans in training, Neil Matheson, Chairman at Atlantis Leisure, Alan Cunningham, Secretary, Broxburn United Sports Club, Graham Hunter, Founder and Managing Director, Research for the Sky Basketball, and Les Brown, Director and Treasurer, New Millens Snow and Sports Complex. So thank you everyone for coming along here this morning, and we'll go straight to questions. And Gil Patterson.
Thanks very much for that, Convener. I don't know if everyone was in at the start of the other session that we had previously, and it's the same question basically. I think we fully understand the important role that volunteering brings to sport, and of course with your experience I'm sure you can maybe assist us, and we're particularly seeking answers or input into how we first of all encourage people to participate in volunteering at at different levels within sport. But maybe perhaps even more importantly, how do we retain them? What methods do you think we should employ? And that's basically my question to you.
Who'd like to open up on that? Don't all jump at once. So because you're sitting in front of me, Mr. Cunningham, Alan.
No, it's okay, Alan. Well, I come from a club where we have 650 members and 70 volunteers. And I find a football club, and I find it, well, it is football, but we're breaking in the other sports as well. And I find it's quite easy to get volunteers for the actual football side of it. Plenty of volunteers, fathers, etc. You can always get that. But we are also a new development. It was a 2.7 million development 2 years ago. So we have a facility to run as well. And we've got 2 full-time employees, which are funded from Robertson Trust and Rank. But because they're funded there, they tend to get drawn to do programmes for Rank and Robertson Trust as well. So they can't give all that time to the facility. So then that relies on volunteers to run the facility. And to be quite honest, people don't jump up to be volunteers for a facility, to secretary, treasurers, and that's where I find it harder to find volunteers in that kind of area. But for the actual sporting side, we have lots of volunteers, and in fact we have a waiting list of volunteers coming through for teams. So when I say waiting list, young guys going through their courses with David Drummond and the SFA doing all their qualifications. So we have a good programme of volunteers for that side of it. But actually for the kind of support side they run in, because we were funded by West Lothian Council, Sports Scotland, Cashback, the Robertson Trust, but we were left to manage a building as well. So actually we look after everything, we pay the bills, so it's actually running a business. We're a limited company, we're a registered charity, we're doing all this gift aid stuff as well. So I think it's the hard bit for me is still the volunteering for the facility itself, not for the teams. I don't know if I answered your question.
It's the coaching element is fine, so people that's great. It's the bureaucracy and responsibility bit that
it's the hardest bit, and we keep on advertising for volunteers, but it's the kind of area that doesn't attract people and get them. So actually, we then go out looking for retired professionals and that kind of thing to come and give support. And we're in the West Lothian Volunteer Gateway trying to get support from businessmen and entrepreneurs.
Okay, someone else want to comment on that? Mr. Matheson?
Yeah,
That's all quite interesting thing what Alan says. We're a little bit different in that we're a multi-use sports centre. So we're a real community sports centre. We run the centre with a board of 9 volunteers. So we have volunteer directors who basically run and manage and look after the centre. Now our centre does lots and lots and lots of things, but way back in our kind of history, we've been going 20 years, and we built the centre about 15 years ago, having run a swimming pool for 5. Our concept was really to try and take the pain out of volunteering out of the process. So how do we go about doing that? Our whole project started off with the tennis and squash club, and I ended up being on the committee. And a standard committee would be 75% talking about the drains, the problem with the roof, who's manning the bar, who's doing the cleaning, who's doing the tidy, 25% at the time to do with sport. So we had kind of observed that, and we said we need to change all this. So basically we have built a centre of which we run, manage, maintain the centre, and the sports clubs come in and use and access it as best they can. Now clearly we can't deliver everything to all sports as best they can, but they can concentrate on their sport. So tennis and squash club meet, and 100% of the conversation is about tennis and squash. So other groups can do exactly the same. So what we felt was, how do we take the pain out of volunteering? Now, another really interesting thing we did, which was highly successful, is after we built the building, we set a project we called Play Sport. And that was a very innovative project at the time. We had no sports development officers of any description. And we basically went to every single club and group and asked them, what were they doing well? What could they think they could do better? What were the barriers to them getting anywhere? And we were fortunate, you mentioned Robertson Trust, we were very fortunate. Robertson Trust really liked the concept of what we're trying to do and said, we'll give you some support to that. So we went to each group and said, what's your biggest hassle that really stops you developing? And if that was admin, we said, right, we'll do your admin. We'll do that support for you. If it's, you know, the netball girls woes, we'd love to get new tunics, we can't afford it, right, we'll get you tunics. So we had the ability to spend a bit of money in the areas that really made the difference. And what we found was tiny little things made a big difference.
That's very helpful. I'm wondering, Mr Hunter, is that something that would help your club, or are you okay in terms of that kind of thing?
I wouldn't say so. We use other people's facilities. We don't have our own facility. The way we've retained volunteers is we've set up a coach and volunteer pathway, which I piloted through the Voluntary Action Fund. What we actually did was engage with the volunteers and see, you know, where's the destination, where do they want to get to? Is it a sports leader at high school that wants to go to university? Is it a university student that needs a placement for their dissertation or their year 2? And we just tried to work with them and really see where it was they were trying to go. And part of that, we also provided funding to qualify them, like for their basketball qualification, referee badges, child protection training, first aid training, that sort of thing. So basically from that, when we came to the second stage of the pathway, you know, we didn't have to actually, you know, try and bring in volunteers. They're actually coming to us now. And we thought we only had around 20, and then actually through evaluation there was actually 37 taking part. And from that we've actually helped to get 4 of them into full-time employment, and the rest are either still working with us or, you know, they're at university, and they do come back and forth to us, and we're helping them on their path.
So can I just, because Mr Curran was talking about 2 types of volunteers, one being those that do the, you know, the paperwork and protection of vulnerable groups and making sure all that stuff's okay. Another one is the kind of coaching pathway and the participation pathway. So is Reach for the Sky, have you found it successful in both those areas, and was the Voluntary Action Fund one of the key drivers in getting you to the point you had to be?
No, I would say the key drivers were Firstport, the Robertson Trust also, Rank Foundation, and also we've worked in partnership a great deal with South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture, with their sports development team and also their active skills team. So they've all been very helpful. And also University of West of Scotland, do a lot of work with them.
That's important to know. Mr Brown, do you want to come in relation to this?
Yeah, at New Milk Snow and Sports Complex, our prime sport is skiing. And we're in the fortunate position in that we've been doing this for quite a long time now. We've managed to retain the same volunteer group of directors throughout that period. So we've got a stable organisation who are doing the sort of things that we've talked about earlier, you know, the finances, the running of the business side of it, etc. We also employ one full-time manager of the site, and she does the day-to-day booking, she does the coaching, she's a bit of a wonder woman, this girl, because she does all the sports. She does skiing, snowboarding, mountain biking. She's hoping to get into climbing as the next area that we're diversifying into. So she can teach all of those sports, and basically between her and one or two dedicated volunteers on the sporting side, we managed to keep the thing running. We do rely a lot on bringing in casual trainers and instructors, as well as our full-time staff and volunteers.
Thank you for that. Dr. Gray, would you like to add anything to this?
We don't rely terribly much on volunteers. Our programme's run by the coaching staff at the clubs. That said, we do have some of our former participants come back to help out in the programme, so we have volunteers in that regard, and some of the clubs also have links with local colleges where sports science students, for example, might come in and assist with some of the running of the programme, but we don't rely heavily on volunteers.
That's it. Well, Gil, do you want to come back on anything?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions. Neil Matheson's contribution, how understood exactly what you said, but how did you put it in place in the first? How did that come about? Where did they come from? Were they interested in something in the first place, and how did they coerce to be a kind of management team by the sound of it?
Yeah, well, we when we started off, we formed a group, and we picked and targeted people within the community we thought would be committed to it, and that wasn't really about particular volunteering. That was about the objective of building a big new sports centre, ultimately. So that was a focus, and part of the way through in that, we learned to do other things.
Sounds to me you've already got a hub or a mini hub. So and the problem that Mr. Cunningham raised, are you considering participating in a hub to try? Yeah.
We are actually working with the local West Lothian Leisure. They have an Excite programme, they call it, in West Lothian, and we've met with the chairman of them to form a sports hub. Also, we have a bowling club next to us. Our location is multi-kind of sport, and we just got funding for through the charity Bank of Scotland to convert old junior changing rooms into a boxing club. So we're looking into to be a sports hub and moving away a bit more just on the football side of it. But the bulk of the project was football in the first place when we started football teams. And as I said, it's always easy to get coaches for football teams. It's parents, but it's actually doing the other things that not the glamorous things that run a kind of business that you sometimes struggle with, and that's why we're going more into the professional sector to try to find the right expertise.
Is that showing? Is it too early to see any movement, or is it too early in the process to see the coming together of people who work in the background?
We've actually made quite good headway.
Have you? Right.
We've made good headway, and in fact, three of the main people that are now helping the board are from a retired background, but they've just recently retired, early retirement, so we are getting that kind of support in to help run the club.
Could I ask you another question on that? The three people that you had, did you go out headhunting, or were they involved in another sport?
They were involved, though.
They were involved.
Yeah,
so
they were involved,
You're benefiting from another sport that was... Right.
But where we are trying to get from outside is through the volunteer gateway. As I said, West Lothian have a good volunteer gateway, and actually they're coming to us, they've been already, and they actually do coaching and give us support through finance and IT skills.
And from the skiing fraternity, the people that you said do sterling work, do I take it that although they do sterling work, they're involved in skiing or boarding in some way? Is that their interest? That kind of trying to get a flavour of where people come from?
Yeah, we've all come from a skiing background in some respects. Some people more active than others in skiing, but for example, the facility that we operate has been there for 30 years. It was a council-run facility, you know, way back to the Sarah-Pryde regional days, and we actually just took it over because we believed that the local council was going to close it. So we formed a pressure group and then have ultimately formed a company to take over the running of it. And it's that group of people who saw that as the sort of initial focus to stop the facility being closed. That was the initial focus for us. But we've managed to retain that same group and moved on from there with the same group of people.
Yeah, I'm a boarder myself, so I'm wondering, it may sound a bit obscure being a skier and a boarder. In this regard, are you looking at the prospects of engaging within a hub?
Yes, very much so, because we've diversified from not just skiing and snowboarding. We've got a mountain boarding track, and we've got a mountain bike track, and we've just recently taken delivery of an old climbing wall, one of the mobile climbing walls from East Ayrshire Council. So we'll take that on and diversify yet again.
So my question in that regard then, did that bring other people into the management side, the volunteering management side of it?
None of those brought any more into the management side of it, because
right.
we had the focus
was
all the time.
There.
It was already there. Yeah.
See, Gil, it would appear, if we listen to this, that we've got some templates how to take things forward across the country. But can we take this as what's happening across the country, or as the witnesses we've got here, are you exceptional ideas of what can be done? And the other thing that springs to mind is we talk at community sports hubs and we all support them, and I'm delighted they are rolling out. But do community sports hubs not exist anyway in terms of it's not about the buildings? It's about people talking to each other and coordinating and integrating what they do. And has that been happening in some places for a number of years, and we're now just giving it a name and rolling out best practice across the country? So are you typical for what's happening across the country, or are you the exceptions in terms of good practice?
There's enough examples around the table, but there's got to, you know, for the 4 examples you've got here of good practice and people talking to each other, they're probably, you know, at least the same again, or not more out there that are other examples of that.
Okay. Yeah.
In my experience, I would say no. We're not typical, really. We certainly, in our area and what we do, we're not typical. We've not seen anything like it elsewhere. And just to go back a little bit on what Dermot said a minute ago, we very much targeted individuals to work in our setup, very much headhunted all professional business people because they're running a business. Right. They all have a sporting interest. There's got to be something to spark their interest, but they're very much professionals because they've got a very difficult business to run. Because running a sports business is not an easy business. It's a very marginal business. So every month you're looking at the figures and checking and changing. So it's hard work. And that was made very, very clear at the very start. Any volunteers who want to get involved in the board and in any way at all, this is going to be hard work. Now, and pick up one other tiny little point. Our first board, there were 10 board members. It was 10 years before one left. 10 years. And every 3 years we revolved them and they came off, but they were voted back on and they carried on. So the dedication is phenomenal. You've got to get the right people. It's absolutely essential. And that's a big problem, I think, with a lot of sports things is you've got someone who's good at kicking a ball, so therefore he should run the sports, whatever. And that is a big mistake we make. And I think we constantly make that mistake.
Now, Richard allows the next question, but just before I bring you in, Richard, does anyone else want to add anything in terms of volunteering? Any of our witnesses? Yes.
Yeah. I think I could perhaps just add something, although the programme itself doesn't run mainly with volunteers. What we do hope is that once men have completed the programme, that somebody from them will take it forward and keep the group going. Now, we do end up that we have individuals who are very proactive in doing that, but what happens is it is very difficult for them to keep going. There isn't any support for them to keep going with that. So we do struggle with our volunteers in that regard.
Thank you. Richard Lyle.
Good morning, everybody. What I'm interested in, we've just had the Olympic bounce and everyone's euphoric about it, and we're now moving forward to the Commonwealth Games. And can I not take away all the great work that your volunteers do and all the clubs do? But can you share with us, and I think this is the magic bullet that George was talking about earlier, can you share with us your frustrations of how long it's taken you to get there and the pathway that you've had to cross, or the people you've had to deal with. Should we have clubs getting more involved with, some councils have local sports councils, and sports development officers? Are we developing enough, talking enough, and trying to make like the West Lothian plan, or the East Ayrshire plan, or North Lanarkshire plan, in order to develop all the sports that are in our community?
Any takers on that?
I think in terms of the...
Mr Brown, yeah.
Yep, sorry. We've been on this journey, if you like, for about 10 years. So it's taken us a long time to get to this point of, you know, where we are seeing a fair bit of success in terms of capital funding to develop this site. But it's been a bit of a struggle, you know. So, and I think the main key, the key part of that, for the key message that we've got out of that, is perseverance and consistency. Because if we'd had board members or management team that chopped and changed, we might not have had that perseverance element that we really needed to get to this point. It's been such a long time.
You say that I've actually driven through New Milnes and past the facility on several occasions. You know, you say you were scared the council were going to shut it down, yeah, and you took it over. How much help then did you have from your local sports council or local council in order to develop your plan to reach your goal?
Well, we got initial funding to start us off, and it was the council that was prime in that. But we also had to go out to some other loan funders and take loans to get the match funding from the council. So we really had to take a big leap of faith there in order to get this thing going. It has paid off in that respect, but you know, it was quite a daunting prospect to begin with.
If I could just ask Mr Cunningham, how long did it take you to reach your facility? How many years?
It was a long road as well. We started in 1999. Facilities were terrible in the area. Everybody was complaining to the council. Mr Rayburn, who's left, was with the council at the time, and he came out with a community initiative. And Broxburn, he did the whole of West Lothian, not just Broxburn, but Broxburn jumped at that initiative. All the teams came together. We all kind of got under the Broxburn, although the teams kept, because lots of them have history. The junior team has 100 years history. They all come under the Broxburn United Sports Club umbrella, but they keep their individual names, but they're part of the club. And it took us until 2007 before we got anywhere at all. And to be honest, we got put through lots of hoops, being accredited. So we had West Lothian Community Club accreditation schemes, and once you reached it, because no funding was available, they gave you another part of the scheme to follow, so you had to go and achieve that. And it was the same with the quality mark through the SFA. You had to achieve quality mark before you could get funding. And we were a bit fortunate, actually, that it was just at election time and things started to happen in 2007.
Lastly, if you bear with me, Convener, that's the point I'm trying to get at. Is there any way that we can reduce the time, you know, 8 years? Sorry, I didn't catch less how many years, you know, roughly. 10. So there's 8 and 10 years, and, you know, I heard yesterday talking about, you know, the next generation will hopefully remember the Olympics. But I share the frustrations that you have of a time span from getting an idea to getting people together to getting the actual facility. Is there any way we can reduce that time span?
It'd be nice if it could be reduced. I can't really come up with an answer that says, you know, if you do this, that would reduce the time scale. There's going to be a lot of different factors that would help. But yeah, that would be a big help if it can be reduced in some way.
That as well. That was the hardest time for us to keep volunteers, because actually when you're doing all these things but you don't see a lot happening. And I know that, you know, it's not just about facilities, as you say, it's a club, and you have to have the club, but you really need a club room or some place for everybody to meet. You know, when they come in and do their activity and then disappear again, there's no club ethos. So you really need to have the facility to kind of, or a facility to pull them all together. And that's 7 years, and until our facility was actually built in 2010, it was hard to get everybody together and have a club feeling, actually, identity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I think I'm going to move on to another question now. Drew Smith. Oh, sorry, Graham, my apologies.
Right.
Graham Hunter.
I just wanted to say that it's obviously different for me because I use other people's facilities, but I was able to get started really quickly, and that was working with the sports councils because they had like a policy in place for like under 16 participation. You know, the wholettes would be free, so that really gave me the chance to push forward, and there wasn't a huge risk there that, you know, if I took out all these different facilities and tried to create these academies, you know, I wasn't going to be hit with a huge bill that I couldn't pay if, you know, no one turned up. So for me, getting started, that was really helpful from the local authority to work in partnership with them.
I'm glad we didn't move on because that was an important piece of evidence. Can I just ask you if there's anything else that you thought made the speed of growth of Reach for the Sky as an organisation helpful? You've mentioned the Sports Council and getting free lets for different facilities. Is there anything else that was put in place to allow you to grow the club at pace?
Just the support from Robertson Trust and First Port. They were really, really helpful. It's been a combination of all different organisations. So it's Sen Scott as well, they've been really helpful. But I think the local authority at the very start, you know, took a lot of time, sat down with me and really talked me through the process, which allowed me to develop a model where I can roll out to anywhere now. So.
I suppose before we move on, you've done the inquiry a service. I suppose it makes me think it doesn't matter whether it takes 8 years or 10 years, but that is blood, sweat and toil. But there's usually a game changer where someone or something steps in to make it fall into place. So, Mr. Brown, in your situation, what was the game changer for you? When did it start to fast track to really grow the organisation?
I suppose the thing that really changed it for us was whenever we started talking to the big lottery. We had this vision of completely resurfacing the skiing surface and also putting a new building in. And we started talking to the big lottery at that point, and we got very well down the road of funding from the big lottery. So much so that what they wanted to do was to take our application to the next stage, and they funded the cost of that. So there was feasibility studies done, there was technical studies done on the site, there was planning up, you know, designs and drawings drawn up, architecture work done. There was planning permission applied for and granted. There was building warrant applied for and granted. So we got to that stage, and once we were on that kind of level, it meant that we could take it to the next stage beyond that relatively quickly, within a couple of years of that point. So I guess having the vision and getting onto that sort of first rung on the ladder was really the crux for us.
Okay, would anyone like to add anything else before I bring in Drew Smith for our next question? Yeah.
I think the game changer for us was getting community involvement in the early days. We were already running the swimming pool, but we wanted to build the big sports centre around it. And we had spoken to a number of the funders, and you get answers, but they're not particularly specific. But one thing that was very clear was you'd have to get a pocket of your own money. So we need evidence of what we're doing is doing it well, but we also need our own money. So we went to the town, and we basically had a 12-month hit in our local town, which absolutely attacked everything in the town. So the whole community completely came up, and we raised £350,000 in our wee community, which was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. We apologised to all the other funding organisations that said, we're really sorry, we're going to hit you really hard for 1 year, but in 12 months we're just going to shut it completely. And that totally changed the focus, just a massive groundswell of opinion that really nobody could stand in the way of. It didn't matter who the funders were. When you had that evidence and that wee pile of money and a clear need for it, it was just hard for them to say no.
Drew, very patient. Drew Smith, next question.
Thank you, Convener. I'm interested in the connection between the previous evidence session and this one, and particularly speaking to the governing bodies about their role and how they promote multi-sport opportunities. And here we've got various examples, but particularly Mr Cunningham's example of that actually being done on the ground and being done at a grassroots level, and you're now welcoming the involvement of the council's progress towards community sport hubs has been a positive thing, but that's not what started you off down this road. And you also said that in terms of your volunteering challenges, the biggest challenge was around governance and the bureaucracy that all of that brings. So in terms of the governing bodies, what more? Well, A, what support do you feel that there has been in the various governance bodies that you have to interact with for a multi-sports club, and what more could there be?
Is that Mr. Cunningham? Yes.
Yeah, that's me. Working with the governance body, actually, our biggest help has been working with the West Lothian Volunteer Gateway, actually. That has been the biggest help. We've worked, when you do some of your accreditation programmes, like with the SFA, it's more than just coaching, it rolls in also the kind of business side, some of the club side as well. But West Lothian Council has been very helpful to us, actually. To be honest, in the whole project all the way through, West Lothian Council have really been behind the project. You know, I attend a lot of meetings where other regions come in and say about, you know, the support from the local council. West Lothian Council were behind our project for day one, and actually they've given us a lot of support outside it through some of their other departments. I don't know if I've answered your question, kind of.
I suppose what I'm kind of trying to ask is the work that you have to do to comply with the governing bodies and what they're asking you to do. Is there a way that some of this could be brought together? I mean, I presume that there's form filling involved for to affiliations to different sporting bodies, to being accredited in them for different things, to doing their particular coach training. Do you get any sense from those bodies that you're involved in that they are saying, how can we help you do this together? You're a multi-sports club, you're doing something that those bodies just told us as a committee they agree with and support. But I'm not seeing a lot of evidence.
No, we don't find any real problem with that because we have specialists for each of the sports we're doing, actually looking after their sport as well as volunteer for other parts in the club. They're looking after that area, and that's not really the issue for us, actually.
So you're comfortable that that's done
Yeah,
separately?
we're comfortable with that, yes.
You want to widen it out, Drew? Mr. Hunter, your experience of national governing bodies?
Yeah, in terms of the start-up phase, the governing body were really helpful with different policies, you know, the different policies you'll need to move forward, like your child protection policy, you know, the things like that in nature that I had never had experience with previous. So, you know, they've got, not that I'm still using them currently, but to get started, you know, it gave me a template to work from and a starting point to be able to go and get a holiday and, you know, to get start-up funding. So that was helpful.
Anyone else want to put on the record their kind of experience of national governing bodies? Mr. Brown, have you been working in partnership?
Yes, we have indeed. We've worked very closely with Snow Sport Scotland and Scottish Cycling. Particularly the Scottish Cycling was fantastic in the support they gave us to not only when we were building and creating the mountain bike track that we have, but also in supporting some of the volunteers of that particular sport to get accreditation and giving them training and expertise and support and help and things like that. It was excellent.
What was agree in terms of the football fans and training programme supported by the national governing body?
It's certainly supported by the Scottish Premier League, who have worked with us very closely in terms of everything that we have wanted to do. Our aim at the start was to implement an evidence-based programme, so not just to put in any old programme, but something that would really help to engage men and to help them to make long-standing changes to their health. And I think what we found is that the Scottish Premier League and Scottish Premier League Trust have been fully supportive in all our efforts and have perhaps allowed things to go at a different pace to what they would have ideally liked, to allow us to put the very best programme that we've wanted to develop in place.
I'm going to bring Richard Simpson in a second because I know he's got some questions he wants to ask around the kind of health benefits of greater participation. But in terms of, say, the Scottish Football Association, have they been supportive? I know you mentioned the SPL and the SPL Trust. Have the SFA helped drive this agenda as well?
No, it's only been the SPL and the SPL Trust. I think the SFA would be very interested in it, and certainly we would hope in the long term that the programme would be rolled out beyond the Scottish Premier League. But initially, we've focused our partnership as being with the Scottish Premier League rather than the SFA.
Thank you. I wanted this to be a good opportunity to bring in Dr Simpson to continue the line of questioning you had from the first panel.
Yes, it's really trying to look at further links, and you've talked a little bit about local authority links and the volunteer gateway and how important that is. And we've talked a bit about the sports governing bodies, but what about health boards? In fact, there are two groups I want to ask comments on. One is health boards and whether you're getting any support from them at all, anything on either the volunteering side or indeed on the governance side, because they, as an organisation, have a capacity sometimes, if they encouraged volunteers to come out and help, it would be beneficial to them as an organisation in terms of their objectives. So, are they actually engaged in this area at all? And then I'll come back maybe on the second group as well in just a minute. But the other bit is primary care in the health side as to whether you have any links with primary care. And someone like Oban, for example, are the primary care practices engaged in prescribing activity and giving you support?
So Richard, for clarity, it's about, in terms of people who may participate in the sports that are on offer, how the NHS or GPs or whoever may have signposted possible participants towards you. Has there been any experience of that kind of partnership work? Yeah, Dr Gray, first of all, and then I'll come to
Yes, we have started to look at ways of doing that. It was hampered a little bit last year because we were doing an evaluation for which we would have needed National Health Service ethics. So we had to make informal approaches to clinicians throughout Scotland, and certainly the majority of clinicians that we did approach were very interested in the programme and certainly agreed to put our leaflets and advertising around the surgeries. We weren't able to make any formal recommendations or to get them to prescribe the Football Fans and Training programme to their patients. However, this is something that we very much want to pursue now. Once we get the evidence that the programme is effective, our next step is to very much engage with practitioners and health boards to try and get this into the surgeries so that patients can be prescribed.
Okay. I suppose there's prescribing and there's signposting patients to what's on offer as well. We may come back to the difference at some point, but Mr Matheson, you wanted to say
I've got a wee bit of a long story in this. We have a health professional on our board, and she is absolutely excellent and very progressive. We have done GP referral schemes for a good number of years. We've seen the challenges there are with GP referral schemes that are significant. So we actually investigated and looked into that to see what exactly was going on, looked at national stuff and actually found that it was not good quality. So we liked the principle of GP referral, but thought, how do we make this better? So we set up a completely new business called Healthy Options, and that's a separate charity in its own right. It's funded partly by the Robertson Trust, which has been hugely helpful. Which, an interesting wee aside is, these are game changers. These small lumps of money from independent organisations who let you do what you really want because it's going to make a difference in your area. And what happens now is, if someone goes into the... Well, actually, our local GP practice has 10,000 on its books, of which at least 3,800 are deemed to be chronic, but can be influenced by sports or by healthy lifestyle. So what happens now is we have someone who's trained, who goes into the health centre and is sent by the GP to that individual. She sits down for half an hour period or whatever and spends some time to really flush out of them what might they just sign up to doing. It's a relatively new project, probably less than a year old. Stunning results, absolutely stunning. A real game changer, to be honest, and I think it's one that potentially will be rolled out elsewhere. I think the principles are just absolutely fantastic. And basically, they can do, I think the term is social prescription. I'm not involved directly in this part of the project. They can be any sport or any activity, any healthy activity.
But just Clark helpfully saying it'd be quite good to get some more written information in relation to that.
I actually gave that to, I was here a week ago and I left some, but I'll get more sent. It's a really good story about it.
I think what Mr Matheson was saying also about the research at a national level about simple prescribing is not good. I mean, it has not worked, and therefore just simply to espouse a system in which GPs are encouraged to write a social prescription is actually just ticking a box. You have to have more than that, which you're now describing. There has to be somebody that goes in and actually meets with the patient and looks in detail, as you said. So I think that's a critical piece of evidence that we should get in writing too. So it'd be very welcome.
And of course, we'd also, Mr. Matheson.
All I was going to say was the fall-off rate and GP referral from the current scheme, the GP gives something to the individual. Very often, by their nature, they're not in any way sports or health conscious. So they actually never turn up where they're meant to go. So it doesn't even start at the start.
Okay.
So we'll try to kill that off.
And it would be good to get more, and I am going to let you back in so that you get something very meaningful to say on this, but I'd like to gauge the other witnesses we've got in terms of whether you think that this is a potential pool of more volunteers or more participants. Would you like your organisation to be part of that mix? If there's a coordinator down the local health centre saying, here are some of the physical participation options you have locally, what would you like? Mr. Cunningham, would that be a positive thing for you?
Well, we don't get any referrals, but we are actually working with the schools on a health and wellbeing programme that we get support through the National Health Service. So it's delivered, someone from the National Health Service and one of our coaches go to the schools, and it's simple things like cleaning teeth, what you eat and that kind of thing, and it's linked to sport, and there's a kind of quiz and games and such like, and that's getting delivered to all primary 3 in Broxburn, Winchborough and Uphall schools, and all the schools in that area. We are also at primary 5, 6 and 7 doing fitness through football, because it's okay, some kids are involved in football, but a lot of kids aren't. But for obesity and such like, we're trying to bring them in where it's not a competitive environment and do things like that. So we're doing that. The only other thing in that kind of area is that the club does have its own physiotherapist, not just for football. So what we are actually doing is that the community people, older people, last week there was a lady 80 in, they come in, and we've actually geared the cost into all this, because normally a physiotherapist, £35–40, is geared at £10 a session. So we bring the people in. So we're really busy with that kind of thing in the community.
I don't doubt you're absolutely busy, but the model that was kind of being put forward, interesting what other witnesses think. Like Mr. Hunter, for example, do you think that's a potential pool of those that are not active that your club could be involved in getting active?
Absolutely, absolutely. Be happy to have people signposted to us. We also do a lot of work in primary schools and secondary schools, but what I'm more keen to look at is the NHS Child Healthy Weight programme, because I think that's where we would have a better fit. But if people being directed to us, absolutely.
That's good to know. Mr. Brown?
Yeah, totally agree with that. Yeah, it would be great to get some referrals or signposting in from NHS.
And of course, the bit is rather someone choosing to go to your organisation rather than being told to go to them, which I think is the point Mr. Matheson was making. Dr. Gray, my apologies for cutting you off there. I wanted to find out what the general feeling was on that. You wanted to come in?
Yes, I just wanted to echo Mr. Matheson's point that getting a referral from your GP doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to go there. And we've had lots of anecdotal evidence from the men who've been on our programme, because they are men who are overweight, they are inactive, they are at serious risk of complications with health, who've been told time and time from their doctor that they should be doing something and perhaps given some sort of signposting and just haven't turned up. So there's got to be a suite of options. There's got to be something for everybody, because what one person would engage with is not what the other person would engage with. But it is a real, the project that you've got with representatives from your organisation going into the health centres, I think that's absolutely excellent.
Does anyone else want to come in on that? The next question from Nanette Millen, but Richard, do you want to maybe...
I'll come back later if I may.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Nanette?
I mean, it's related, but I actually heard a very impressive presentation last week at the Sports Cross-Party Group from Mr. Matheson about the development of his organisation. And I just wondered, have you actually shared that presentation with the committee clerks? Or, yeah, that's excellent. I'm glad to hear that. No, it's clearly not only people being referred for health reasons to sport, but obviously an active life for sport involvement is important throughout life for people. So, I mean, there are clearly other groups like women who don't get too much involved in sport, like older people. And clearly there are initiatives happening in various areas. Are the programmes that are being developed being monitored in any way? Is there any, do you know if there's any sort of research ongoing that's keeping track of what is actually happening in good practice with a view to perhaps rolling it out?
Mr. Matheson?
I can just mention on the healthy options one, yes, it's been monitored very, very closely, really close to exactly what's going on. And actually it's quite interesting because what they're finding is that a lot of people who may be getting referred have mental health issues. And actually doing a little bit of something can make a big difference. Yeah. I find that really, really quite inspiring. In actual fact, a week last Saturday I was stopped by somebody, I went to a wee art gallery, and he said, "Are you still involved in Atlantis?" "Yeah, I'm still involved in Atlantis." "That healthy options, your girl saved my life." "What are you talking about?" He says, "Completely changed my life. I had this and that, and the next thing wrong with me, put me to this girl, and it just completely changed his life." Now, that's why we still do what we're doing 20 years later, because you get that kind of feedback back, and we have thousands of kids backwards and forwards doing stuff. It keeps the energy going, and that's why you still want to keep going volunteering as volunteers. But we do need to keep the stats, because we're keen that this one will kind of go somewhere. But I didn't mention before, we got no help whatsoever from the health service at all. Now, we're in a rural area, we're hugely challenged. There's a massive challenge with governing bodies and all sorts of things because we're rural. And that's a big issue that still needs to be overcome. So basically what we've done is we create our own models for everything, because we have to. Because if we don't do it, it just ain't going to happen. So that's a really, I think, important thing, and that's why having the people together who are dedicated and constantly, you know, when someone goes after a period of years, you get someone who's really keen and enthusiastic still to keep going and doing it. So, yeah.
You mentioned monitoring there, Nanette, and it did come up last week as well. And the question was raised about various sports clubs that there are in the country. And do we work out where the underrepresented groups are? So you'd mentioned females, Nanette, older persons, people in deprived areas. And how can we get sports clubs that are doing good jobs and maybe stretched to the limit already to engage with underrepresented groups? So it's kind of, I suppose, two aspects to that. Do any of the organisations currently here, do they do a monitoring exercise with who comes through their clubs? And do you actually have time to then go, these are the underrepresented groups, how do we reach out to them? So, Mr. Hunter.
Can I just add on to disability? I mean, we've just had the Paralympics. I'd be interested to hear comments on engaging that group as well.
Absolutely.
Well, it kind of goes back to the game changer situation. When we first engaged with the Robertson Trust, you know, they felt it wasn't enough to just give us a lump sum of money and say, you know, go and try your idea. They actually partnered us up with Evaluation Support Scotland, who have been working really closely with over the last 2 years. So what they've really done is help us develop a tool for each project, you know, that we go out and deliver, so we can get the right statistics and know who we're working with. And we've used it heavily on, we've got a girls initiative where we'll go into primary schools and secondary schools and, you know, give girls a chance over 4 weeks to play basketball, you know, without the boys being present, and then try, after that 4 weeks as well, we have our academy in that local community, so at the end of it we try and move them along that pathway into sustainable activity and, you know, try and have a long-term effect. So we do have a monitoring system in place, and I actually have the piece of work with me today if anybody wants to have a look at it.
Thank you, and should make that available to the committee. That would be appreciated. Mr. Brown?
Yeah, just to pick up the point that Dr. Simpson made about disability, one of the things that we're currently doing just now is we're upgrading the 2 ski slopes that we have. Well, we're upgrading from 1 to 2, but the smaller of the ski slopes is going to be a beginner slope, but it'll have a travelator lift system that will allow disabled people easier access to use the facility, which does answer that kind of question. Yeah.
In terms of monitoring, Mr. Cunningham, is there anything that Broxburn's doing?
On monitoring our 2 employees, actually, this is a Robertson Trust one, but they've all got their outcomes and targets. And actually, part of that is the monitoring, and there's reviews 6 months for the Robertson Trust and quarterly that we do at the moment. We rank on, and the things that we've been speaking about are all itemised in these kind of sheets, all the targets for the 2 staff members we have. On the disability side, we actually hired one of our full-time employees. We hired them from the SFA, and he was responsible for disability football within the SFA. and he's working with 3 special needs schools in West Lothian on disability sport. And we have a disability class on a Saturday morning where parents bring their children in and such like, and we have a disability session. When one area we have soccer school, other area we have disability activities going on at the same time.
Thank you for that. Dr Gray, can I come to yourself in terms of the football fans and training? I have to say I went along to one of the sessions at Celtic Park. I wasn't referred, but perhaps I should have been. I just went along to see it in action, and the people there came from a whole cross-section of communities. Does that programme, whether in Aberdeen Football Club or the SPLO does it, do they target from one community, or is it GP referral quite strictly, or how does that work?
No, I think what we have with the professional football clubs that we have in Scotland is a real draw from people across society. And my role is the evaluation of the programme. So the Football Fans in Training is extremely closely evaluated. And at the moment we're running a randomised controlled trial, which is the gold standard evaluation. And that's what has been so good about our partnership working with the SPL, with the clubs and with the Department of Health to allow this gold standard evaluation to take place. But what we have found, so we know exactly who are on our programmes, and what we have found is that we attract from across the socioeconomic spectrum without any special targeting. So what I would suggest is that there should be some recognition of this attraction that these clubs have, and perhaps they can be used to target people from specific backgrounds that you want to engage, because they do have a powerful reach.
Okay, that's clear. Before I move on to our next question, would any of our witnesses like to add on in terms of what you're doing, or what could be done more to get greater participation in sports from underrepresented groups, or the monitoring process? Because now would be a good time to get some of that on the record. Mr Hunter?
What I've tried to do in my report is try and show how we're meeting the government's national outcomes, and I feel we're meeting 11 out of the 16. And as I said, I'm happy to distribute that today if anybody would like to have a look at it.
I want to ask that information because obviously it's important to monitor things, but we're conscious that the monitoring process can be bureaucratic and too burdensome, so it's getting the balance right. So thank you for that information. George, you wanted to come in with a new question?
Yes, it was just to go, the Football Fans in Training was a cross-section in Paisley as well, St Mirren. In fact, most of the people were actually upset that they all got free kit and they couldn't get that themselves, but it was good because it was a whole cross-section. My question is for everyone, is when it comes to like disabilities and things like that, these are people who probably still need to have some form of fitness within their life as well. I know from my own wife's perspective, from multiple sclerosis, she now goes to the gym with a local group, working together, similar to your own programme, Dr Gray, working together with people with similar abilities makes a big difference in their life, and actually makes a difference in their whole aspect of their day, apart from anything else. And it's little things like that that can make a difference. And I'm just saying, as groups and as teams, and how are you actually accessing that? How are you doing that?
Okay, yeah, Mr Hunter.
Well, our development academies are open to everyone. You might have 30 young people taking part on a Friday night in Cambuslang, and you've got boys, you've got girls, you've got young people who've got potential to be elite athletes, you've got children with disabilities, you've got overweight children. It's just a good mix of everyone, and that's something that we try to get across within our ethos, is just that everyone can take part, and it's all about fun, because there's a place for elite sport, and we feel at our grassroots level it's about giving everybody a chance to take part. Like when they take part in our academy league, we have our own rules that it's 5 on, 5 off kind of thing. Everybody gets the same equal chance, and I think that's really important, because obviously young people all develop at different ages, and especially including people with disabilities.
Mr Brown?
Yeah, a while ago we embarked on a programme where we put our manager through a training programme to teach disabled skiers, and we brought in some specialist equipment on loan, sit skis, to help guide them down the hill, and also we've had visits from blind people who've come up to help to take part in the facility.
So we've had some experience of that, but it's really not something we've focused too much on recently. But it is something that we really ought to look at again.
Yeah, I've got a bid for another question, but if anyone would like to add on to this one? Yeah, Dr. Gray.
I would just like to add the question of targeting underrepresented groups. I think what we need to do is not just a numbers evaluation, because that's quite often when we think of evaluation, it is just numbers. But what we need to do is to speak to the people that we want to target and the people from those groups who are involved and find out what it is that they want and what they need. And I think perhaps that's a very good first step to try and target these populations that we want to engage.
Mr. Cunningham.
Upon that, we had a request to actually start a walking football for 60 plus members, and in fact we're starting the first one this Thursday, and actually we've had about 15 people coming. They're going to have a cup of tea to start with, but they're interested in, some of them are 70 odds now, played football when they were young, but now they want to do walking football. I don't know how it's going to work, but they asked for it and we're trying to deliver that kind of.
Is that a good example of when you design ways of taking clubs and sports participation forward, you have to actually do proper consultation and community planning to work out how to take that forward? Is that something that you do as a matter of course, Mr. Matheson?
Yeah, I'm intrigued. I might do that when we go back up, actually. Absolutely love these kind of things. I think that's one thing that we sometimes lack a little bit of, is being too, we have to play the sport like this. Actually, the reality is what we need to do is we need to make it real fun. We need the kids, the young folks, want to come back the following week. I know Graham does that kind of stuff, anyone and others will do the same. But I mean, that kind of thing, I absolutely love the kind of concept of that. It makes me think when we did our play sport programme to start with, what we were all about was making it as affordable as was possible. So basically, any sport in any discipline cost £1 to come along, to participate and be coached. Now, we can only do that because we got funding. And again, the Robertson Trust came up, they helped with that and said, this is a great idea, we love it, that'll be great. And this will really ground and embed things in. So that was fantastic, and that's left us a legacy nearly 10 years later with play sport still a massive part of what we're all about and kind of is the real engine of our organisation. As far as handicapped folks are concerned, we don't actually have an awful lot of handicap in the area, but what we're huge on is that we're a community facility for all the community to use in every way. So we're not a this type of, or a that, or the next, it's multidiscipline. So we hugely encourage handicapped folks of any form or any issues at all to come in the centre and be helped. We've also just employed a full-time youth worker to really work with young people and to train our staff to understand what youth is all about. So not just kick a ball, but really understand their lifestyles. So she's now going and has had fantastic results over the last few months of going to different areas where these young folks are and bringing them to get involved in things around the centre and changing their outlook. So that's been hugely helpful.
Thank you very much. Jim, you've got another question?
Yes, I just want to return to an issue that was discussed in the previous panel, and it follows on from what Mr Matheson's just said about encouraging participation among young people, and that is what specific activities are your clubs and initiatives involved in that seek to engage young people who are at risk of antisocial behaviour, or indeed older people who are at risk of antisocial behaviour? Not wanting to be ageist about it, but seriously, what you're actively engaged in doing to target and address that specific sector of our community?
Mr Hunter?
Yep. Yep. Basically, working with our academy, young people, there was around 525 took part last year. It was coming up to the end of the school term, so some of the academies wouldn't run over the summer holidays. So, you know, we've been encouraging a lot of the young people to use the outdoor sports courts. I think I heard that in the last section. You were saying about basketball courts not getting used, and that's something that we realised and we want to do and utilise, you know, this equipment that was there. And a lot of the feedback we got from the young people was, you know, they're not allowed to use them or they're scared to use them. There's a lot of, you know, that's where gangs will hang out, that sort of thing. So we wanted to design a project that, you know, made it, number one, safe for them to take part, and then number two, try and engage with the young people that are possibly causing the trouble. And then at the end of that 6-week process, you know, try and filter them back into, you know, our long-term pathway, whether it is the academy structure or our coach and volunteer pathway, and try and give these young people that say nobody cares, you know, try and give them the chance to, you know, come on a pathway where people do care and there is no excuses, and, you know, we can help them take that next step wherever it is they're trying to go. And that was funded through the Sarah-Pryde Police Community Partnership Fund in partnership with South Lanarkshire Council.
And what of the...
So I should have asked as part of the original question, what are you doing to evaluate and monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of those interventions? And are we building up the evidence to show what difference it's actually making?
We'll have our own evaluation tool in place. You know, we'll have, I think we've had just about every participant take part in a questionnaire, which we didn't think was going to be possible, what we have. And I'm going to analyse all that information over the next 2 weeks. We're also working in partnership with, you know, the Sarah-Pryde Police, and they're going to look at, you know, how many incidents were reduced. They're using one of our areas, which was in Green Hills in East Kilbride, as the example of that. They're going to look, you know, was there a reduction in crime or antisocial behaviour?
So, Mr. Cunningham, I'm wondering if you've got experience in Broxburn.
We've been working with the local police, and actually the crime has dropped in our area. We've been open 2 years, and they came with the statistics, and it's dropped dramatically. So is vandalism, and from that we went for additional funding, and we managed to get funding, and we bought 5 iPads and 5 laptops, smartboard, etc. And we're running an after-schools IT class now. One of our board's a school teacher, IT teacher, so he's come in, he's delivering that to kids. In the summer period with the bad weather, although we've got a 3G pitch, we actually went and bought 4 table tennis, big table tennis tables, and we put them in dressing rooms to bring kids off the street. So as well as being a football-based club or sports club, we're trying to become a true community club as well. And the police are really, a lot of our events, the police visit now, they come in, have their cup of tea, their pie, and take part in it. So there is a good atmosphere about the club. That is one of the big positives we have had, actually. And when we built this new facility, I was really worried about the vandalism. And to be honest, there's been nothing in the 2 years since it opened. Nothing at all, outside, inside, nothing. It's been great. The kids treat it as their place now. And that's not club members. We have 650 club members, but the doors are open to everybody. Yeah. And I can get the police statistics to you. They brought the whole statistic, and they're really impressed with what's happening.
So you've got a good example of partnership working. You've got buy-in from the local community, and you've got beginning to amass some of the evidence which supports the value of the intervention that's taking place.
So, other witnesses have got examples. Like Mr. Brown, is there anything that your organisation has done to kind of reach out to maybe those who otherwise would be getting involved in antisocial behaviour? It's a big ask, but you know, it's one of the key areas that the committee is interested in as well.
That was one of the key things that we looked at whenever we were building our mountain bike park. We did involve the police. They came to a number of meetings, and we looked at, you know, what's the target audience for this type of facility, and you know, we were specifically looking at kids that would normally hang about the street corners, give them something to do instead of that, and that was a big one for us.
Specifically on mountain biking, presumably the entry costs for participation in that particular sport are quite high. Even if you buy a second-hand bike, you're not going to get much change out of £100. How do you then engage with young people who are at risk of antisocial behaviour because they perhaps are coming from more deprived backgrounds?
Well, in that case, we would need to provide them with equipment. We don't actually we haven't actually got to that stage yet with the bike section, but it's an area that we did look at, and certainly the initial cost could be quite prohibitive for a number of people. So we would need to have a range of bikes of different sizes and quality to be able to give them, you know, that step up that they would need to get into the sport in the first place.
So perhaps allowing people to hire bikes who can't actually afford
it could be, yeah,
to purchase one.
Mostly hire, but we'd probably bundle that into the price if we, you know, we'd price it such that, you know, if you came with your own bike, it would be one price. If you didn't, it would be another price.
So there are some barriers there, but they're not insurmountable with
no.
the willingness to tackle and address that issue.
Yes, Dr. Gray?
Yeah. So I think although the Football Fans and Training Programme targets middle-aged men, there are a number of other initiatives across the Scottish Premier League within the clubs that target disadvantaged youth. And I think what they've shown is that the sports clubs themselves are a real hub, a draw for people coming in. So it's not necessarily even to do sports programmes. So there's a music box project which specifically targets at-risk vulnerable youth to come in on an evening and do something to get them off the streets. There's support from employment schemes, and also just using the club facilities as somewhere for the kids to come for whatever it is, whether it be pool, snooker, or whether it just be to sit around and talk to people and just feel a part of something.
Mr. Matheson?
Yeah, we again very much been a community type facility and try and encourage all aspects of the community to be involved. We do a thing called Friday Freestyle, where on the Friday the whole centre is taken over and becomes a massive youth club. So basically there's a host of activities put on for 3 hours or something on a Friday night, and that's encouraged between 70 and up to 120 young folks to come in and get involved. A lot of these young folks would never walk in a sports centre, and that's one of the interesting things about what we're trying to do with ours is almost not perceive it as a sports centre, but it's a community centre that does lots of sport. And that's been really interesting, and we've partnered with youth charities, with the school nurses, with the doctors, police, all sorts of partners getting involved in this. And they will come and deliver little programmes on these evenings. It might be about stopping smoking, or it might be about alcohol, or whatever it is. But the police absolutely love it. So we've had the police up who are saying, these young folks on a Friday night, they would normally be at the pub door. We've seen that before. So that's one thing we do. We also do another thing called we call a lock-in, which is really interesting. It's an overnight lock-in. We lock 150 approximately kids in the centre at 10 o'clock at night and let them out at 8 in the morning. These are first years, so they get exposed to the centre at every level, so they spend the whole night doing umpteen sports and then get shoved off in the morning kind of half dead. But they've all seen the centre and had something they'll never forget. And they've been in the centre door. So, I mean, these kind of things, I think, are huge hooks to these young folks.
I should point out that I saw a knowing look from Dr. Simpson when you mentioned the expression lock-in there. And given our previous discussions of minimum pricing, perhaps best not to explore that at the current moment in time. Thank you for that. That's interesting. I don't see any other bids from my MSP colleagues for a further question. There's a wee bit of time left. Now's the time to catch my eye if you've got a supplementary question, which I see they don't. They've talked themselves to a standstill, which is very unusual for them. I suppose all that remains to do now is, if you think there's an area of questioning that we've just not covered that you think is important, if you think there's a message you want to leave us with in terms of our community's sports inquiry, now would be a good time to do that. So there's no questions, just if there's a comment or an observation you wish to make, then get it on the record now, and we'll maybe just go around the table. We'll start from Mr. Brown.
Or to add at this stage?
Okay, thank you.
I've said enough. No, I've got nothing else to say.
Mr. Cunningham?
The only thing I would say is that with our club, we seem to be getting drawn in quite a lot of areas, like school areas, where we're doing it because it's actually not been done at the school level. And actually, our 2 full-time members spend most of the week actually out at the schools, delivering programmes to the schools. And our club really comes to life in the evening from 5 o'clock till 10 and full weekends. But during the day, these guys are out doing these courses. So because they're the full-time members, their time, their employees, they work 37 hours a week. It's the volunteers that are left then to do everything at nights and weekends, because these guys' time are eaten up during the day. So we seem to be delivering lots of things that are not being delivered by other departments, areas. We're kind of left to the community to do these things, actually.
And you mentioned you have done the committee a service by mentioning schools. We haven't really pressed anyone very much in terms of what your engagement has been like with local schools. Although some things have been mentioned in terms of the Active Schools Network and everything else, Mr Cunningham, have you had a positive relationship?
Yeah, it is, and we run after-school football clubs. We're running West Lothian football programmes because we have a 3G facility. We're one of the few in West Lothian, so our pitch is always playable. So on Fridays we have West Lothian schools coming. So we've run a lot of activities like that, and we're doing secondary schools and primary, as I said, in Uphall, Broxburn, Winchborough and Bridgend and Lithgow. So our people are out and about doing that. But in my view, they get funded through Rankin Robertson Trust, who are brilliant funders, by the way, but some of the objectives are to do that. Whereas I'm secretary of the community club, and my role is really to try to keep the community club going in the area. So we kind of to get the funding, you tend to get dragged in different areas, actually. So that's my observation.
You have mentioned something very helpful, because the national governing bodies were kind of talking about schools should be doing more, and we were asking the national governing bodies, well, are you talking to schools? Are you talking to each other? We're asking them to coordinate closer with each other, and they seem to be saying, well, that's up to the schools to do that at a grassroots level. But when you scratch beneath the surface, we're seeing that actually on the ground there is quite a good productive relationship between community sports clubs and schools. So that's good to get on the record and helpful to us. I think Mr Matheson, now would be your opportunity.
Yeah, I think really all I would say is that just we probably all understand the massive benefit there is of sport in community and in people's lives. We need to get that message out to a wider audience. Frankly, I find it quite amusing, sad in a way, that you've got to try and educate people. To us is blatantly obvious, being honest. But I think we need to ensure that what we do is fun. It's got to be innovative. We're just not going to do it the same way it's always been done. And I think there's a challenge for your governing bodies and your funders who've got to act in the same way. And that's a challenge that we have. So you've heard Rank and Robertson mentioned quite a lot. Frankly, if it wasn't for them, none of us probably would be sitting in this room, actually, in all honesty. So that's a really significant thing. And that's because what they allow us to do is be creative and produce the outcomes our way, not the way that it looks on a piece of paper it should be done.
I think that's a point well made. Thank you for that. And we'll give the last word to Dr Gray.
Thank you very much. I think the point I would like to leave with is the fact that, as has been alluded to earlier, sport and activity is not just about one particular part of your life. So there are great, fantastic children's initiatives, youth initiatives, but for me the real challenge is engaging people in sport throughout their lifetime. And talking about accessibility, it's not even affordability or being close, it's allowing people to find time in their day to take part in sport as they enter their working life and beyond. And also giving older people the confidence to do it and getting across the message that it's not necessarily sport per se. I think there's a sort of a misconception of sport that it's got to be at an elite level, whereas actually what we need to encourage people to do is to be physically active in a way that suits them. And the point that you made about making sure the message and people's appreciation that what they should be doing is fun. Quite often when people do exercise and sport, they do it, they push themselves too far, and they come back and it hasn't been a fun experience. I think we need to get across the message that physical activity in any form, whether it be sport or whether it just be something that you do as part of your daily life, is good for you and should be fun, and it's going to improve your life as well as your health.
Dr Gray, thank you for that, and can I thank all of our witnesses for the time you've spent this morning putting your experiences on the public record here. Hopefully this won't be the end point in terms of your interaction with the committee in relation to our inquiry. I know a few of you want to give us additional information, but I would ask you, or I plead to you, to follow the inquiry as we go through further evidence sessions and look to see what's said. If there's something you agree with and you want to give added weight to it, get back to it. If there's something you disagree with, then make sure you write in or email the clerks and let us know, because we'll continue to look at any additional evidence you want to give us, and thank you very much for your time. Can I suspend briefly before we move on to the last item on our agenda, please? Okay, everyone, we're nearly there. Can we move to agenda item 5 here still just this afternoon, and we agreed that we'd take agenda item 5 in public. The committee will recall that we looked at and agreed the programme of oral evidence and visits to be undertaken as part of its inquiry into support for community sport at last week's meeting. It was also suggested that the inquiry might usefully seek to address what could be called outdoor pursuits or physical activity rather than sport per se, and also look at the relationship of sport with business. The paper that you have before you from the clerk seeks to address the points that were raised by members at last week's meeting and suggests organisations the committee may wish to contact for written evidence. So if you've all got your paper in front of you.
For some reason I didn't get papers this week. It may be my end of email, but
okay, we'll get one to you. And it was, I'll maybe give one or two aspects from it, Dr Simpson, in terms of, for instance, outdoor activities. Evidence sessions agreed last week included hearing from organisations such as the Scottish Canoe Association, who we heard from today, Scottish Swimming and Newmill Snow and Sports Complex. So we've already been engaging with some of those, but some suggestions has been made about additional organisations we may wish to approach. It might be helpful if I just read them out briefly before we come to a decision. Suggestions were that we call for written evidence from Active Communities Paisley, who made a presentation recently to the cross-party group on sport, to the Scottish Centre for Healthy Working Lives, to the Gilphead National Activity Centre, to Scottish Outdoor Education Centres, to the Active Outdoor Pursuits, and to Glenmore Lodge, which is a national outdoor training centre. So the committee is asked to agree that we contact each of these organisations for written evidence, given the concerns that were raised last week. Can I ask if that's agreeable to everyone? Okay, Richard Lyle.
Would it be possible, you know, we've heard and we've seen how much money the National Lottery is now giving to outdoor, to sports clubs and other clubs. Would it be possible to also bring them back in, bring them in this discussion to see what the National Lottery has a plan of doing, in particular to sport funding over the next number of years, you know, how they'll, you know, depending on sales, and hopefully sales will keep up, but basically what the National Lottery funding will be in Scotland, how they intend to disperse it, and the clubs or mix, and also the point that was made earlier about cashback. You know, maybe we also want to ask those further questions about cashback.
I think that's quite helpful. What we want to do is write to the Big Lottery Fund to ask them what investment they have made and what their strategy is going forward in terms of sports and greater participation. And indeed, we can ask government about their strategic priority in terms of cashback as well, and we'll certainly do that. I saw Drew Smith. Did you want to come in on that?
It's not specifically on Richard Lyle's point, but it's just on the list of additional people to seek evidence from. I just think we need to be a bit careful that we're maintaining a distinction between sport and physical activity, and that we're also not mixing up outdoor activity and physical activity more widely, because I think these are quite different things. And I think we then need to be quite, if we're getting into the realm of physical activity, which I thought we'd agreed at the start we weren't really particularly doing, then there would be a much wider group of organisations that you would go to, because actually encouraging people into health enhancing physical activity is done by a whole range of people who wouldn't have any particular connection with sport. So I'm just cautious of you know, pulling a programme around increasing physical activity from a particular part of Scotland and saying, well, that's an example of something, we'll hear what they've got to say. But we're not taking it, we haven't taken any evidence on the national strategy, particularly around physical activity, the whole range of other organisations in terms of walking, jogging, separately around swimming. I think there are legitimate points that Richard Simpson made around the Centre for Healthy Working Lives, but I think that's not about how they promote physical activity in that sense. I think it's about how they support volunteering and how they support people's involvement in sport. So I just think we need to keep our terms quite tight here, otherwise we could just end up with a very wide-ranging set of evidence that I don't I don't think it's particularly coordinated in terms of where that then takes us. So it was my concern arising from the reason we talked about outdoor activity was that it was raised with us that some people thought there were less opportunities through outdoor activity centres now, essentially as a result of cuts. I think that is an important and separate issue, but I think there's possibly something arising from the end of this inquiry, depending on the conclusions that we make, that we write to the Education Committee and other people and say what, in terms of what people were talking about today about schools, outdoor activity centres and local authorities are really the responsibility of education departments, not leisure departments as such. So I just think we need to keep these things quite separate.
Gail Patterson.
I know where Drew's going with that, and in some regard I agree with him, but I mean, if you look at Scotland as a whole, it's got 4 cities, big cities, and not a lot in between. So in some regards, an inquiry into support for community sport, it is outdoor activity that in certain parts of Scotland, that is it. And all my life I've either climbed or skied or something outdoors. There ain't a lot of community halls in lots of parts of Scotland. So I know what you're saying, that we need to be focused, but I would like to see some people coming in to, explain the volunteering that's involved at that level too. It's a big part of engagement with people for activity, for sport, for leisure. It almost is the same thing for me.
Okay, any other comments in relation to that in the net?
I think that there is a kind of grey area, isn't there, between just straight physical activity and actual sport. And I take points from both people. I had been going to wonder, was there any organisation or any group that would be representative of the older age group participating in sport or physical activity that would have anything to contribute to the inquiry? I don't know if there is. But again, that would very much overlap between physical activity and sport. So it may not be relevant.
I'm keen to allow the conversation to continue before we come to a conclusion. Drew, do you want to come back in there?
Well, I mean, just on that one, I would have thought that the key organisation there would have been Pass for All if we're looking into that in terms of the largest number of that's a Scottish Government funded programme that's trying to increase physical activity for older people. And I should declare an interest because I used to work for that organisation and would be absolutely fascinated to have the Parliament examine some of those issues. I just think it's moving quite far away from a community sport remit of this inquiry.
Jimmy, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I think Drew Smith makes a very fair point in terms of the scope and remit of the inquiry. And I think the question for me is not, in principle, that any of us would object to receiving written evidence from these organisations, but whether we as a committee can do justice to a proper investigation and evaluation of the issues. And, I don't think anyone would push it to the extent of saying that we shouldn't receive written evidence, but I think the point that Drew makes is a very fair one about whether we can actually have a proper inquiry.
Okay, Richard Simpson.
I like the idea of actually us completing this inquiry on a relatively focused way on community sports, and following on from that, maybe doing a short session at some point in our calendar in the future to actually follow that up with something that looks specifically at the relationship between community sport, physical activity and outdoor sport as a separate but focused issue. I like that concept. I like that idea.
I want to give a second point, convener, if I may, but it's not on this issue. But
yes, I want to make another
is
point
it right? Is it in relation to right?
It's in relation to Richard Lyle's earlier point.
Right, hang on, everyone. Just in terms of who we write to or not write to, is what I'd like to discuss just now, so we can make a decision on that. So, does anyone else have an additional comment to make on who we write to for further evidence?
Before we go to that stage, convener, I mean, I do take on board the comments that Drew makes, and that was very helpful from Richard Simpson, and I would be happy even not to write in that regard if we kept that on our agenda for later on, or the prospect, no guarantees given, but a prospect of perhaps looking at it at some other point, I'm happy, I would accept it.
The thing is, Gail, there's always the prospect of doing something else in the future, and we'll have to look at all the available slots we have in our work programme coming forward, and not just looking at community sport, of course. Now, specifically on who we write to or don't write to, are there any additional comments before I perhaps make a suggestion, Richard?
Have we actually got stuff in from the Robertson Trust? Because that kept being mentioned today. We have had something in. I wonder if they, I wonder if they want to make any additional comments after today, if whether they, you know,
okay, Robertson's Trust
are they on our list already?
Be here at a future evidence session.
They are at an evidence session. The other one was rank that was mentioned. I don't know if we've had anything from them.
Would it be worthwhile if any funding providers were mentioned in the course of our evidence sessions, that we might want to check whether they've submitted anything in writing, and if not, we might want to contact them and see they've been mentioned in conjunction with our inquiry? Would appreciate any information they wish to give us. Would that be helpful? Okay. Now, just in terms of who we do or don't write to, I'm loath not write to these witnesses, but I think Drew Smith's point was, and I think I made it last week as well, we shouldn't dilute the focus of what we're doing in terms of community sport. But I'm minded that in this paper we have before us, it mentions swimming, cycling, running, jogging, walking, kind of sports actually. And the issue I think that was made last week was how we're using our outdoors as a facility. We spoke a lot today about the different facilities that we have or don't have, the infrastructure we have in Scotland, and it was made, the point was made last week that you know, particularly the Scottish countryside is a wonderful facility for sport, for community sport. On that basis, if we made it clear to the organisations we're writing to that this is specific to how they can use their facilities to facilitate community sport, would members be content to write to them? Okay. Thank you very much for your agreement on that. Are there any other issues in relation to the inquiry you'd like to?
My point was covered off by Richard Simpson's contribution, which was simply that I think the Bank of Scotland Foundation had also been mentioned, so we should also write to them.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I think we're there, and just remains for me to say that next week's meeting will be held at 9:30 and will be a round table on the approval process for newly licensed medicines in the system of individual patient treatment requests in Scotland. And with that, I bring this morning's or now this afternoon's meeting to a close.